I have no literature degree. I don't think I even took a literature class in college. So everything I say is just vibes. I'm just a random bitch. You don't have to listen to me.
I don't think I've ever drunk champagne before breakfast before.
Well, I've got a wonderful idea.
Hello and welcome back to the Movies for Breakfast podcast. I'm your host. My name is Christy, and today we're discussing Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So it's been a while. I have been kind of MIA this month, and I want to talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video for those of you who follow me and are actually curious and want to know what's been going on. But up top, I think the conclusion I have come to is that posting weekly 2-hour-long plus videos that are analytical and in-depth is just not sustainable. So I'm gonna focus moving forward on a bi-weekly posting schedule because I think it would just be better to be more consistent with a less frequent schedule than to burn myself out going crazy posting every week for a while and then disappearing to recover, which is kind of what's been happening. So moving forward, bi-weekly schedule. I hope you can understand and still enjoy what I'm able to put out. And know that it's not coming from a place of laziness. It's coming from me just being really stubborn about the kind of content I want to put out. I want it to be really in-depth and I want it to be really high quality. And if I were willing to compromise at all on that, I could post every week, but I'm just not willing to. So here we are as a result. I have already recorded 45 minutes of this video, but it was all out of focus. So we're starting over, but hopefully this time, I think we're in focus this time. Yeah, so on this podcast, I normally discuss and analyze movies in depth, but people really enjoyed when I talked about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte in the format of a detailed plot breakdown with cast photos on the wall to help you keep track of what's going on. And in that conversation about Wuthering Heights, Frankenstein came up a lot because the Frankenstein 2025 Guillermo Del Toro movie was also heavily criticized as an adaptation and as a standalone work. And it's another 19th century English woman author. Naturally, I understand where that connection is coming from, and I'm happy to talk about it. I have read Frankenstein pretty much 3 times now. I read the 1831 standard edition first. Then I tracked down the original 1818 text and read that. And then I read the 1831 version again. And every chapter went and read the 1818 version again. And have now heavily annotated both copies. I feel like I've really done my homework and I'm ready to get into it with you. Given the premise of this video, it kind of goes without saying, but there's going to be spoilers. I'm telling you basically the whole story. So if for some reason you've been waiting your whole life to read Frankenstein and you haven't done it yet, go read Frankenstein and then come back and we can talk about it. Primarily, I'll be doing a in-depth plot summary, but I'll also give some of my own thoughts and analysis as well. And I'm going to give a super brief background on Mary Shelley and the history of this book because it's impossible to ignore. But I highly encourage you to go do your own research and reading about Mary Shelley and her life and work because she's a very interesting character. Also, friendly reminder to please like, subscribe, and comment if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave me a 5-star rating and review. It's all that I live on. It's all that I eat. It's all that sustains me. I need your 5-star rating and review. Please. Thank you. Okay, let's get into it. So if you don't know, Mary Shelley was born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, 2 famous authors, both known for being quite politically progressive. Mary Wollstonecraft tragically died giving birth to Mary Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin was raised by her father, William Godwin. Mary Shelley married Percy Shelley when she was a teenager, right after he left his first wife, with whom he had children, in order to be with the teenaged Mary Shelley. He was a bit older. It is quite salacious story, I would say. But Percy, if you don't know Percy Shelley, is a famous romantic poet. And Percy and Mary connected very much intellectually as well as romantically. And one summer, Percy and Mary were spending time with their friend Lord Byron at his lake house near Geneva, Switzerland. This happened to be in 1816, known as the Year Without Summer. Following the eruption of a huge volcano in the previous year, this summer was extremely gloomy and dark, and whatever outdoor activities that the Shelleys planned to partake in turned turned into a summer of pretty much being locked inside in a really gothic, gloomy atmosphere. And the group entertained themselves partly by reading ghost stories. And then they decided, why not have a little competition? Why don't we all write our own creepy, spooky ghost story and see who writes the best one? What else would a house full of writers get up to? So Mary Shelley is hanging out with these older men who are her friends, and they're having a writing contest, and she's freaking out because she can't think of anything to write, and she really doesn't want to look like an idiot and be embarrassed when everyone writes some fantastic spooky story and she has nothing. And every day they come down to breakfast and everyone says, "Okay, Mary, what's your idea? What have you written so far?" And she has to say, "I don't know yet." Okay, she's mortified. There's lots of different stories about where she drew her inspiration from. She herself lived a lot of tragedy and death, even at such a young age. She had lost children. She had lost her mother when she was born. And like I said, the atmosphere that summer was extremely gloomy, and they were reading a lot of spooky stories. She was very interested in galvanism at the time, which was a science related to like the reanimation of dead things. And the story goes that she had a vision, a nightmare of a young student kneeling in front of his creation, terrified of what he had done. And thus was born the seed of the idea for Frankenstein, the very, very, very famous story of Frankenstein. So by the end of the summer, she had a draft of what was to become the 1818 published novel, Frankenstein. And then years later in 1831, she republished with edits. Some of the changes are incredibly trivial, like line edits, swapping in basically synonyms for each other. But some of the edits are pretty substantial changes to story and character and to theme. And it's definitely very interesting to compare the two texts. Now, in terms of limiting the scope of this video, I cannot promise to give you a comprehensive comparative analysis of 1818 and 1831. However, I have focused on some of the selected changes that are in the copy of the 1831 version that I have. There's some like annotations of important differences between 1818 and 1831, so I use those as a guiding light as well. And as I go through the story, I'm going to primarily rely on 1831, which is considered the standard edition that you would have read in high school. I'm primarily going to rely on that for the narrative, but in certain points, I will point out changes from 1818 where I thought they were particularly interesting. And beyond that, I highly recommend that you do a pair reading where you read the chapter from 1831 and then go read the chapter from 1818 back and forth like that and pick out your own comparisons. But yeah, for the scope of this video, I'm going to primarily give you 1831 and I will nod to 1818 occasionally. Another thing you should know about Frankenstein in context of pop culture is a lot of people point to this as the birth of science fiction and point to Mary Shelley as the teenage girl at the time who invented the genre. And I really do enjoy that. I like that. I think to the extent that science fiction is associated in our popular imagination with men, with like male nerd culture, and often with misogynistic tropes, I like to ground us in the reminder that science fiction is for everyone. I've always loved science fiction. I grew up loving science fiction, and the first author of science fiction was in fact a 19-year-old girl, Mary Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Okay, that being said, that context being given, let us get into the story, shall we? The story takes place in the late 1800s and is originally given to us by letter. So we hear from our narrator, Captain Walton, an English ship captain, via letters he writes to his dear sister Margaret back in England. So Captain Walton is in St. Petersburg preparing a journey of exploration, scientific exploration up to the North Pole. So this is obviously going to be kind of a dangerous, unprecedented journey, and he's having a hard time getting together a ship, sailors to staff it, a lieutenant, people he trusts to go on this dangerous mission with him. But he's extremely ambitious. It's always been his life's dream, his life's goal to discover and explore new things that no one has seen before. He writes very affectionately to his sister Margaret. One of the most endearing things about the character of Captain Walton is he writes about how much he longs for a friend, a true friend. He says he has a hard time connecting with the men that he often works with because it's a very, he doesn't say fratty, but to my brain, fratty kind of sailor environment. These men are uneducated, uncouth, very rough around the edges, and he says he was raised by the gentle, feminine attentions of his dear sister Margaret and is more sensitive and less harsh than the men he's surrounded by. So he just really longs for a friend. He is able to find a lieutenant that he trusts who's a really good guy. He gives us this whole long-winded backstory gossip about how this guy was supposed to marry this woman and she begged him not to marry her because she was in love with someone else who her father wouldn't let her marry because he was poor. So this guy left his house and all his money to that other guy so that he could marry the woman he loved and who loved him. And then he just disappeared and never asked for anything in return. So that's Walton's lieutenant. And he's really setting out to captain this ship with, respect and dignity, etc., etc. And he's nervous, but he's really, really excited. Finally, the ship gets on its way, and along its journey, something really, really strange happens that kind of ignites the main narrative of the story. So in his 4th letter home to his sister Margaret, he says that one day the ship was encased in ice on all sides. Obviously, they're traveling through really icy waters, but something happens. There's kind of a storm. They get disoriented. And in the morning, as the fog clears, they look around and they realize they are just completely surrounded by ice as far as the eye can see. And the ship can't move or go anywhere. So the men are kind of freaking out and they're, looking around trying to see where the nearest land is. And they spot about a half a mile away in the distance, a huge, huge man, what appears to be like a giant of a man, sitting in a sled carried by dogs, pulled by sled dogs. They call it a sledge, but that just doesn't feel right. It's a sled to me, and I will be referring to it as such. So they see this man, this huge man, in a sled carried by dogs, and they go, okay, well, maybe actually land is closer than we thought. Maybe it's not so bad. And indeed, the next day, the ice kind of breaks up a little bit more, and the men find a man, a different man, also with a sled and just one dog left alive. He's completely emaciated, looks like he's freezing to death, starving, and he's just floating on this rogue piece of ice in the water all alone. And of course, they run to get the captain. They know their captain is a good, decent guy, and he's going to want to help and rescue this stranger. So Captain Walton is absolutely baffled and taken aback when he says to the man, okay, come on board, we're going to help you. And the man is refusing until he finds out what direction they're traveling in. He says, before I get on board, where are you guys headed? And Captain Walton's kind of like, what the fuck, dude? It shouldn't matter where we're headed. You're dying. You're for sure gonna die. At least come on board so we can, get you better, and then we can worry about where you're trying to go, But once Captain Walton says they're headed north, towards the North Pole, the man seems satisfied, and he does, in fact, come aboard. And Captain Walton describes him as completely wild, seemingly haunted by something, completely deranged, but underneath having something of a really special personality. They also tell this man about the giant that they saw on a sled about half a mile away the previous day, and the man seems excited by that because that is who he's chasing. That is who he's looking for. But yeah, very quickly, Walton expresses to his sister how much admiration he has for this lost stranger. He says, I begin to love him as a brother, and his constant and deep grief fills me with sympathy and compassion. He must have been a noble creature in his better days, being even now in wreck so attractive and amiable. I said in one of my letters, my dear Margaret, that I should find no friend on the wide ocean. Yet I have found a man who, before his spirit had been broken by misery, I should have been happy to have possessed as the brother of my heart. Some very emotional declarations of love here. So after a few days, the man has kind of recovered and he's more aware of his surroundings, and he sees how much Captain Walton is ambitious about his goal of traveling north into the more and more dangerous and icy waters for scientific exploration. So Captain Walton is, confiding in this new friend and expressing to him how desperately he really wants this, how he's willing to sacrifice a man's life even if that's what it takes to pursue it. As I spoke, a dark gloom spread over my listener's countenance. At length he spoke in broken accents. "Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me. Let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips." So the man they've rescued is alarmed by Captain Walton's extreme one-track mind ambition and willingness to endanger other men's lives, to endanger his own life, to sacrifice everything for this scientific knowledge and discovery. He sees himself in Captain Walton, and he thinks that his tale of desolation, what has led him to his current state, will be a cautionary tale to hopefully lead Captain Walton out of the same mistakes that he has made, which is why he decides ultimately to share his story. Lucky for us, because that is the story of the book. Okay, so after 4 somewhat tedious letters from Captain Walton back to his sister Margaret in England, we finally switch the narrative to chapter 1 to be from the perspective of the man they've rescued, who is, of course, Victor Frankenstein. My Victor Frankenstein on the wall, you may notice, is Tom Hiddleston from Crimson Peak, 2015, Guillermo Del Toro. As always, I guess not as always, this is the only second time I do it, but as with Wuthering Heights, this cast on the wall is not me saying I think that these actors quite literally should have been cast in the 2025 movie. It's just kind of a as accurate as possible picture of what I saw in my head while reading, while actually avoiding the cast of the 2025 movie so as not to cause any confusion. Some of these pictures are like 10 years old. So anyway, they couldn't be cast currently for what it is, but I did my best. I will reveal who everyone is as they are revealed to us in the story. For now, we just know Captain Walton, and now the man that he has rescued, who's telling us his story, Victor Frankenstein. He's frequently referred to, I feel like, in pop culture as Dr. Frankenstein. He's not a doctor. I'll just say that. He kind of barely finishes undergrad. He's not a doctor. It's just Victor Frankenstein. All right, so Victor introduces himself to us and introduces his family to us. He comes from a very distinguished Genovese family, and no, that is not Genovia of the Princess of Geneva, Switzerland, of course. So his father is kind of a lifelong public servant, very much publicly respected and admired for his integrity and good character. And that is Alphonse Frankenstein, Victor's father. Victor's mother, née Caroline Beaufort, met Alphonse because her father was Alphonse's good friend. And when his good friend got sick, he saw how much the daughter, Caroline, sacrificed to take care of him. She worked multiple odd jobs, trying to make enough money to afford food and medical care. She tirelessly looked after her father, and it kind of broke Alphonse's heart to see. And so when her father finally passed away, Alphonse placed Caroline with a relative in Geneva. And so this would have been something like having them take her on as a ward, being financially responsible for her, making sure she had a roof over her head, her needs met, what have you. But less than 2 years later, they also were married. And Victor acknowledges to Captain Walton that there was quite a significant age gap between his parents, which I think is interesting, knowing that our author, Mary Shelley, also had a bit of an age gap to her husband, Percy. And Victor is like a little bit defensive about the age gap to begin with. He's like, look, I know there's a big age gap between my parents, but they loved each other. My father just wanted to see to her every need and comfort. She had suffered so much. All he wanted was to give her the most happy and comfortable life possible. She was an angel. She's such a good person. And most importantly, as parents, they were both incredibly loving and caring to Victor, their eldest son. So he says, you know, he couldn't have asked for better, more loving, more doting parents. He felt completely adored and completely loved from his earliest memories. Okay? Now, what about the rest of the family? He has 2 younger brothers and an adoptive sort of sister/cousin, Miss Elizabeth. So the story of how Elizabeth comes to be part of the Frankenstein family is very interesting, and her origin as well as her character is one of the biggest changes from 1818 to 1831. So I will give you both, starting with 1831. In the 1831 version of the story, Elizabeth comes into play when the family is on vacation at Lake Como, and Victor is around 5 years old. His parents would often go visit the houses of the poor, give money, do basically charity work and community service, right? Because they're a very wealthy, distinguished family. But having come from poverty and struggle herself, his mother always wanted to give back, right? So Victor and his mother are visiting one of the houses of the poor, and there's this family that is clearly destitute, impoverished, and they have like 5 children to take care of. And Caroline, Victor's mother, is particularly taken with one of these children. Why, you ask? Let me just read to you. One day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these, there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distinct species, as being heaven sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. Okay. So tough shit for the brown-eyed babies. Caroline falls in love with this beautiful, blonde, angelic little cherub. And it turns out that she's actually the daughter of a Milanese nobleman, and the German mother who birthed her had died, and so she was given up to be raised by these poor foster parents, basically. And Caroline decides to adopt her and bring her into the family. Sit with that for a second, and let me give you the 1818 version, and then we can discuss what this all means from Mary Shelley's point of view. So in 1818, Elizabeth is Victor's biological cousin on his father's side. So Alphonse Frankenstein has a sister who gives birth to Elizabeth, and then when his sister dies, he adopts her into their family. And her physical description is also a bit different in 1818. She is still described as being like incredibly beautiful and looking angelic, but she has hazel eyes, not blue, and I believe her hair is described as being auburn. In both cases, Elizabeth is brought into the home and kind of given to Victor as a gift, as a companion. They have about 4 or 5 years between them, but Victor just absolutely adores her. He feels a kind of possession over her, an ownership over her. And it's very clear from the beginning in both stories, whether or not she's biologically related to him, that the parents, especially his mother, intend for them to be married one day. That, you know, when parents have little kids and the kids are friends, they go, oh, so cute, they're going to get married one day. That's kind of the deal with Elizabeth and Victor. Victor says, and when she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. This is 1831, where they were not literally cousins. That's why he's saying that. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me. My more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. Yeah, from the beginning, I feel like you can see the connection to other Gothic literature like Wuthering Heights in just how dramatic and emotionally intense the writing is. There's a lot of like really deep declarations of love, admiration, passion, connection, deep, deep feelings. from the very beginning, even from Captain Walton, who's kind of just our stand-in and our narrator. But there we have Elizabeth Lavenza, who becomes an adoptive sort of sibling is the closest thing I would say. But she will be referred to throughout the book as his cousin. They call each other cousin affectionately. Now, why did Mary Shelley write the adoption of Elizabeth that way? Why write about Elizabeth as fairer than a garden rose amongst dark-leaved brambles? It kind of made me sick reading it, made me really sad. It reminded me a lot of the discussion of race and beauty in Wuthering Heights, in how Heathcliff waxes poetic about Edgar's blonde hair, blue eyes, even forehead, high brow, and how he wished he looked like that just to have a chance at being rich and respected. And in Frankenstein, the idea of superficiality and beauty is also a central theme. The entire life of the creature is governed by people's reactions to his physical appearance, to his lack of physical beauty, to how monstrous he appears. And I think presenting Elizabeth as a foil to that, as someone whose entire life was changed as an infant, just because she was so fair and beautiful according to the beauty standards of that time and place, which was to be as fair and blonde and blue-eyed as possible, just because the colors on that baby were different and brighter than the other babies all around her, her entire life was changed. She was plucked out of poverty into one of the most prominent families of her country, or not her country, she was in Milan, one of the most prominent families of Switzerland, to be raised with the best education, the best clothes, all of the vacations she could dream of, the most loving and doting family, servants, all of that, just because of what she looked like as a baby. And I think it's presented to us as a foil to the life that the creature will live later. And even though Victor is not, in my opinion, Victor is not critical of this at all. Victor's not looking at this saying like, I know it's kind of messed up that my mom only picked that baby because it was cute. He's saying like, isn't my mom such a good person? She just recognized this angelic quality in this beautiful girl who I love. I think that Mary Shelley is criticizing that, at least I'd like to think so, and presenting it as a kind of basis of Victor's worldview. Victor has been raised by these parents in this environment. He himself is quite superficial. He often comments on people's physical appearance and draws conclusions about their character based on it, the same way that he would have been taught to do by his mother, who literally adopted a child for being pretty, according to her standards. Tough shit for those other babies. Also, just on the Frankenstein family unit, Victor has two younger brothers. One is Ernest, who's about 6 years younger than him, and the youngest, is William, who I think is about 15 years younger than Victor. And Victor looks affectionately upon both of his younger brothers. Elizabeth is definitely like his best friend, and at least within their household, we'll get to Henry, they're like the closest companions, but his younger brothers are also very dear to him, especially William, who's like the baby of the family. I also just want to keep talking about Elizabeth a bit more because it's not just her origin that differs from 1818 to 1831, but also Victor's attitude towards her and her character as described to us by Victor. So in 1831, when Victor is kind of describing Elizabeth and himself as children, it's hard not to feel like he sees himself as superior. He has kind of an attitude about his own intellectual greatness and genius, and he loves Elizabeth in a more condescending way, in a more like, isn't she so cute and feminine way? Whereas in 1818, I feel like he describes her more as though they're equals. So let me just give you some quotes to back that up. In 1831, he says, Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardor, I was capable of a more intense application and was more deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. She busied herself with following the aerial creations of the poets and in the majestic and wondrous scenes which surrounded our Swiss home. The sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers. She found ample scope for admiration and delight. While my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearances of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture as they were unfolded to me are among the earliest sensations I can remember. So according to that, essentially, I read that as Victor saying like, oh, Elizabeth really loved how beautiful things were. She liked artsy things. She just liked appreciating nature. I was curious to understand the why behind things. I had this thirst for knowledge and this passion for learning that Elizabeth just didn't have. And he also says that he is capable of more intense application. Like he can think more deeply and intensely about things than Elizabeth. Let's compare that to 1818, the original. Although there was a great dissimilitude in our characters, there was a harmony in that very dissimilitude. I was more calm and philosophical than my companion, yet my temper was not so yielding. My application was of longer endurance, but it was not so severe whilst it endured. I delighted in investigating the facts relative to the actual world. She busied herself in following the aerial creations of the poets. The world was to me a secret which I desired to discover. To her it was a vacancy, which she sought to people with imaginations of her own. So, to me, that's much more beautiful and balanced, and it seems more like he's saying we both engaged deeply with the world, just in our own ways, and together we balanced each other out. He actually kind of says the opposite of in 1831 when he says he's capable of more intense application. Here he's saying, I might have focused for longer, but it wasn't as deep as Elizabeth. So it's just a more favorable view of her, a less maybe like condescending view, a less egotistical description. And I think it's interesting to think about whether Mary Shelley wanted Victor and Elizabeth to genuinely be different in her edit, or she was changing Victor's perception of the same essential characters and showing him as a bit more self-absorbed, while the underlying truth could still be the same, that Elizabeth was actually a deeper thinker, more imaginative than Victor, but he just couldn't see it or appreciate it in the same way. So throughout the story, I think you can kind of hold those two versions of Victor and Elizabeth in mind and see them in different lights depending on how you interpret the text and which version of them you believe in more. Anyway, regardless of how Victor describes himself and Elizabeth, he consistently says that they never ever fought or had any disagreement. They absolutely adored each other, had nothing but love and kindness in the home and in the family. In addition to his adoptive sister Elizabeth and his biological brothers Ernest and William, he also has a best friend because he says his brothers are a lot younger than him, you know, like they're not his friends, they're his like baby brothers. So he has Elizabeth, who is only 4 or 5 years younger than him, and then he has his best friend Henry Clerval, who is the son of a merchant and always at the house, always hanging out. He and Victor are absolutely BFFs for life. Henry too differs a little bit in 1831 and 1818. In both versions, Victor absolutely adores Henry and describes him as like a really kind, wonderful friend. But in 1831, he's kind of imbued with this like colonial military ambition that he does not have in 1818. So in 1831, he talks about how Henry loved knights, enterprise, hardship, and danger. Not really the case in 1818. In 1818, Henry is more of like a theater kid than a future knight. He really likes putting on shows and he likes the arts more so than business and violence. But okay. They all loved learning. They all loved education. And Victor was especially passionate about learning the secrets of heaven and earth, science, natural philosophy, as it is called in the book, but basically science. He really wants to know how everything works, why it works. Elizabeth steers them both to benevolence and goodness. As is often the case with women in literature, Elizabeth serves as kind of like a moral compass and a beacon of benevolence for the boys. Now, Victor has kind of an up and down relationship with natural philosophy or with science as a teenager. So he first comes to be interested in it when he's about 13 years old, and he starts reading all of these old books he finds that are by basically pseudoscientists. Cornelius Agrippa is mentioned often, who's kind of like an alchemist, and he's reading other similar things about alchemy and pseudoscience, but he's really interested in it and he doesn't know any better. His father tries to steer him away when he sees that he's reading Agrippa, literally calls it, quote, sad trash. But Victor's like, he didn't tell me why it was sad trash. So my little teenage brain thought, Dad doesn't even know what I'm reading. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to keep reading it anyway. And his father also is not a scientist. His father's a public servant. So he's less inclined to listen. So he's interested in all of these ideas about the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, raising of ghosts and devils, all of this kind of occult stuff. Then one day when he's about 15, there's this really crazy storm outside, thunder and lightning, and Victor's standing by the window and he sees this huge tree outside get absolutely shredded to ribbons by a strike of lightning. And this really, really affects him. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. This kind of changes the course of Victor's life because he becomes fascinated with the idea of electricity and galvanism. Galvanism at the time was interested in the reanimation of dead things via electricity. So this is very interesting to Victor because all of a sudden, all of his old reading by Agrippa and Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus all seems like BS. He kind of realizes that he's probably been reading BS and these people don't know anything. This is real science that he just witnessed with his own two eyes, something tangible and provable in front of him. But this kind of just discourages him because for years he's been like worshiping these pseudoscientists, alchemists, occult writers. And to realize that all of that is kind of based on nothing, it just discourages Victor. He says, "It seemed to me as if nothing would or could ever be known." So instead, he turns to something that feels more reliable and consistent, which is math. I feel you there, Victor. I was a big math girl. Math will never lie to you. Math will never change. So he takes comfort in the art of mathematics. Victor reflects on this period of time where he was turned away from the natural sciences and towards mathematics as the last attempt of his guardian angel to steer him away from ruin. He says basically, I was so close to avoiding my terrible destiny if I had just stayed away from science, if I had just stuck with mathematics like I was at that time, maybe all of this could have been avoided. But he sees it as destiny. And there's an element of kind of predetermination throughout this whole narrative from Victor's point of view, that he was fated to go down this path of no return, of destruction. And no matter how many times he narrowly escaped it or could have narrowly escaped it or avoided it, fate always steered him back on that terrible path. So he says, "It was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction." So a couple of years later, Victor, when he's 17 years old, his parents decide that he should go and get an education outside of Switzerland and kind of see more of the world, because so far he's been super sheltered. Their family is so close and they were educated so much at home. He has his younger brothers, he has Elizabeth, he has Henry, but otherwise he's not very well socialized or exposed to the world outside of his very idealistic home. So he is going to go study at University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, or present-day Germany. Say goodbye for now to the beautiful lake house near Geneva and say hello to university. I thought the note on the University of Ingolstadt in this book was interesting, so I'm going to read it to you. It says Bavarian University, 1472 to 1800, associated in the late 18th century with the feared sect of conspirators known as the Illuminati, thought by some to be fomenters of the French Revolution. I just thought that was interesting as a setting for Victor's creation. Now, before he's supposed to leave for university, Elizabeth gets the scarlet fever. So she's really not doing well. And no one's supposed to go in there to take care of her because it's highly contagious. But remember, Elizabeth is so much so the darling of Caroline, of Victor's mother. She adores Elizabeth. She's the one who plucked her out of poverty and adopted her. And she just can't resist and can't help it. And she has to go in to take care of her baby, Elizabeth. So unfortunately, while Elizabeth, young and healthy, is able to recover, Caroline, Victor's mother, gets ill from taking care of Elizabeth, and she eventually dies of the scarlet fever. Her dying wish is that one day Elizabeth and Victor will be married. And she also says, as she's dying, that Elizabeth must take her place in taking care of the two younger brothers. She is now the woman of the household, basically, which seems like a whole lot of responsibility for a 13-year-old girl at the time. But Elizabeth is this very dutiful, angelic, obedient girl. So she does take that on. And even after the mother's death, Elizabeth tries to conceal her grief as much as possible to make sure that everyone else is supported and has her positive, beautiful, smiling face to bring hope and lightness to the family. So she takes on a lot of emotional burden for this family from a very, very young age. And it very much feels tied to her gender. So, of course, Victor had kind of delayed his departure to university to spend time with his family grieving his mother's passing. But eventually, the time comes for him to go. Henry Clerval tried really hard to convince his dad to send him to university with his best friend Victor as well. Henry loves education, he loves learning, and he loves his best friend and would love to go with him, especially now that Victor is grieving and they're kind of worried to send him off all on his own so far away. Unfortunately, Henry's father is a merchant and basically sees no value in a liberal arts education. He thinks that Henry is only going to get into trouble and going to study useless things that won't earn him any money, and he doesn't approve. Oh, I forgot that I did do the black and white photos for people who passed away, again, just like in Wuthering Heights. So goodbye to our first character, Mrs. Caroline Beaufort Frankenstein, mother of Victor. Sad loss. On the last night before Victor is supposed to be departing, he's spending time with his father, Elizabeth, Henry, and his two younger brothers, and they're all very sad to see him go. So Victor takes the long journey in a carriage alone to university. And when he gets to university, he takes his letters of introduction to two main professors. Victor says, chance, or rather the evil influence, the angel of destruction, which asserted omnipotent sway over me from the moment I turned my reluctant steps from my father's door, led me first to Monsieur Krempe, professor of natural philosophy. He was an uncouth man, but deeply imbued in the secrets of his science. So he describes this professor very much by physical characteristics. And again, we see how superficial and judgmental Victor can be. So he doesn't like Professor Krempe because Professor Krempe is short and ugly. Quite literally. Mr. Krempe was a little squat man with a gruff voice and a repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favor of his pursuits. So, kind of bitchy of Victor, but also slightly justified because Krempe is very condescending to Victor when he learns that Victor has been reading alchemists and pseudoscientists, and basically laughs in his face and says, all of that was for nothing. You just wasted years of your life. Burn those books. Here's what you need to read instead. You stupid little fool. What an ignorant world you must come from that nobody told you that was all bullshit. Meanwhile, Victor's like, bitch, I come from one of the best families of Switzerland. And actually, my dad did tell me not to read these books, but I read them anyway. So, and then he meets another major professor, Professor Waldman, not to be confused with Captain Walton. That's Walton. Then there's Professor Waldman. Thanks, Mary Shelley. That was lovely of you. But Professor Waldman is more attractive and has a sweet voice, so he has more sway over Victor. And he also happens to be a lot nicer. He, instead of kind of dismissing everything that Victor has read so far and saying like, oh, that was all bullshit, you wasted your time, he has more of a holistic view where he's like, you know what, we wouldn't be where we are today in science if those people had not written what they had written. Everything was a step in the right direction towards the pursuit of knowledge. And now you have that background and that context. Go ahead and read these natural philosophers. This is more evidence-based science. You'll appreciate it more. And the way that Professor Waldman describes science to Victor happens to ignite his curiosity again. Because remember, this whole time he's been more focused on mathematics after he feels kind of betrayed by science and feels like overwhelmed and like nothing will ever truly be known. But now in this conversation with Professor Waldman, that changes again. Victor confesses that he found Waldman's lecture on chemistry actually very interesting and that he would love to read more of what Professor Waldman assigns. So Waldman takes him into his lab and shows him all the chemical instruments, and Victor falls in love with chemistry. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. So again, we keep having these moments where he's like, ugh, and that was fate, that was destiny. Everything is fate and destiny according to Victor. And I think it's such an interesting perspective because he's a bit of an unreliable narrator, right? Like he's at the end of his wits. He's going crazy. He's starving. He's freezing. He is ready to die. And this is his retrospective on his life. And I think it leaves plenty of room for interpretation as the reader. I mean, do you think it was all fate and destiny? Do you think that he could have made choices that would not have led to this? Personally, yes. Personally, I think that Victor is very responsible for every choice that he made, and I don't think that it was some inevitable destiny that would have happened no matter what. I think that's something that he tells himself and in turn tells Captain Walton as he's giving his story, because it brings him comfort to think that nothing he could have done would have avoided this outcome. So now in chapter 4, we get into what you've all been waiting for, which is the inception of the creature. So Victor, as a young student at Ingolstadt, he just falls in love with natural philosophy again and dedicates himself for 2 years to intense study. And after 2 years' time, he even had developed some new chemical instruments that were really useful in the field and had gained everyone's respect. So even though he's so young, he's an undergrad, people really respect and admire him, and he's seen as like this promising new chemistry genius. He becomes obsessed with where life comes from, where death comes from. It's kind of implied that a lot of that has to do with losing his beloved mother before going to university. And of course, that connects to our author, Mary Shelley, and how she lost her mother. He's just very preoccupied with the concept of life and death, to the extent that he was constantly examining cadavers and dead bodies as much as possible to try to understand how they worked and what had stopped them from working when they died. And then somewhat like abruptly in his narrative to Captain Walton, he's like, yep, and then I found the cause of life and how to bestow it. So it took him about 2 years, but he figured it out. Now, this is not the moment in which he actually creates the famous monster. He's just done the first step, basically, which is like short term, he can bestow animation and life upon something, not that he can keep something alive long term necessarily. But this is like step 1, figured it out. He does not explain to Captain Walton how, obviously, because he doesn't want anyone to ever do this again, which is also convenient for Mary Shelley because she doesn't have to explain how either. And so having discovered this, now he's thinking about what he's going to do with it. And he admits that he wanted to create human beings so that he himself would become a beloved creator. And that maybe if he could create a human being, he could even eventually bring humans back to life who had died. He says, a new species would bless me as its creator and source, Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. I think this is so interesting and enlightening as to Victor's character and his motivations. It's quite a dark and narcissistic motivation, if you ask me, to want to create life so that that life will love and owe you is very dark. And I especially like the way that he specifically names that parents can claim the gratitude of their children. I think that's a very old-fashioned way of thinking of like, I birthed you, therefore you owe me everything and you owe me your existence. I think that's the wrong way to think about having children. Children didn't ask to be born. Parents choose to bring children into the world, and you have a great responsibility to the lives that you bring into the world as much as they have any responsibility towards you or obligation to be grateful to you. And I think that, again, I think that Mary Shelley knows that. Victor Frankenstein did not. All right, it's the next day. I had something to go to, but we're back. We're continuing. I was saying that his motivation is kind of messed up. And as he's like working with all of these different body parts, and it's kind of like gross and icky, it's also very intricate work. And so he decides to create basically a giant human, 8 foot tall and proportionally large, basically just because it's easier to work with larger parts and to like connect everything. Then the smaller it is, the more like fiddly and intricate it is. So that's why the creature turns out to be huge. And he goes into kind of like a manic goblin mode burst of energy for 2 years while working on this creature. So he does not go outside. He doesn't connect with nature up until this point. Like generally he's like super into his time in nature. He's not going outside. He's not really eating or sleeping. He becomes emaciated and pale. He doesn't talk to anyone. The professors basically leave him alone because remember, after his first 2 years, he created like a new chemical instrument. And so everyone loves him and thinks he's a genius and they kind of let him do what he needs to do. He's not writing to his family. He has a kind of like single-mindedness that really is like a hyper fixation where he's like, I will talk to my family when my work is done. But until then, I literally can't think about anything else. And I'm just not capable of maintaining any kind of like human affection or connection until this is done. Unfortunately, quite relatable to me. That's how I feel when I'm working on a video or a podcast episode. I will call my mom when I'm done in 2 days. Sorry, Mom. Love you. Partly, he just can't focus on contacting his family. But the other part is that he knows his father won't approve of what he's doing. And he thinks at the time he thought that that would be unfair. And he just didn't really want to hear it from his dad about that. But looking back now, he knows that, you know, actually, if his father were to admonish him for what he was doing, then his father would have been in the right. He says, if the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful. That is to say, not befitting the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquility of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. So Victor kind of extrapolates from his own male ego and fixation on accomplishment what is wrong with a lot of things in the world and in history, in his opinion. He's saying basically like, if your professional pursuit, if the thing that you are like dedicating your life to tears you away from your loved ones and your family and makes you like incompatible with having a loving home life, then you should probably take a second look at what you're doing, because there's probably something wrong with it that is making you feel incapable of connecting on a human level. It's an interesting take. Anyway, so he spends 2 years in this absolute fugue state of focus. And chapter 5 begins with the birth of the creature at last. And the opening sentence of chapter 5 was originally supposed to be the opening to the entire novel, according to the notes. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. It was a dark and stormy night, if I ever heard one. It's 1 a.m. It's a rainy night. It's cold. His candle's almost burnt out. when by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful? Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. So there is the most detailed physical description we will get of the creature. This is, I believe, a sculpture by an artist whose name I will credit in the description. I found it on Reddit, of course, and I thought it was kind of the most accurate depiction that I've seen. He's supposed to be like difficult to look at. He's supposed to be so horrifying looking that like you would struggle to hold a conversation with him. And I think that this fits that bill. So Victor is looking at this creature opening its eyes for the first time and coming to life after spending years working towards this moment. And all at once, immediately, he is faced with the horror and dread of what he's done. He immediately knows he's done something terrible. Victor literally immediately runs away from the creature, runs out of the room, and tries to sleep off the nightmare of what has just happened. And of course, he has a fitful, restless sleep full of nightmares. He has a nightmare that he runs into Elizabeth in Ingolstadt, and he embraces her and kisses her. But when he kisses her, his kiss kills her, and then suddenly he's holding her corpse, and then suddenly it's not her corpse, it's his mother's corpse. Really freaky stuff. And based on what we know about Mary Shelley, being partly inspired by her own nightmares to write this ghost story, this spooky story, I imagine that she might have had some real similar nightmares to what Victor is experiencing. But it's almost like a premonition of the death and destruction that he knows his creature is going to cause. So he wakes up in like a cold sweat, and just to make things worse, he realizes that the creature is watching him. And I just want to say something really interesting I feel like about the writing is there's never a name given to the creature. I mean, that's why like it's pretty understandable that in popular culture we when you hear Frankenstein, you think of the monster, not of Victor. But it feels very intentional in the book. Like Victor will just refer to him as a wretch, a demon, a monster, a creature, a thing, but never a person and never a name. And I feel like it is so, I mean, he's not human, but dehumanizing to have no name and to have nothing to refer to yourself as or for other people to refer to you as besides monster, creature, demon. And it makes it hard to like write my notes about the book or to like explain it on the podcast sometimes because I want to say like, I want to refer to him as something. He's like the second most prominent character in the story besides Victor, but there's no name. There's nothing to call him by other than the creature or the monster. And I think Mary Shelley was very intentional in doing this to make the point, even drive the point home even further through the prose that this being has no identity or agency. He is created, Victor creates him, and Victor does not even consider naming him the way that you would name a child. Whereas before Victor created him and saw him come to life, he was thinking about creating a new being as analogous to being a father to a child. But now that he has done it, he does not feel any kind of fatherly feelings or godly feelings towards his creation. He only feels terror. And that is the beginning of all of the monster's troubles, basically. So the monster has wandered and followed Victor to his bedroom and is watching Victor sleep. He tries to speak to Victor, but he doesn't make any kind of like articulate sounds. He basically like baby babbles at Victor, and Victor freaks out again and runs out, and he spends the entire night just like pacing in the courtyard trying to figure out what he's going to do. The next day, he continues walking. Like as the sun rises, he leaves and he's just walking through the streets of town, trying to somehow come up with a plan and figure out what he's going to do. But he's just basically pacing in horror. And he runs into, of all people, his friend, Henry Clerval. Henry Clerval jumps out of a carriage in Ingolstadt when he sees Victor, and he's like, oh my gosh, hey, old friend. So apparently Henry was finally able to convince his father to let him study at university. Remember, Henry's father was like a merchant and didn't believe in education or like a liberal education. But Henry was finally able to convince his dad to send him to university. And of course, he wanted to go to the same school as his bestie, Victor. And so he has now just arrived right on time. Victor is thrilled. He's so happy to see his friend. He even forgets for a moment the predicament he's in just because he's so excited to see his old friend and he missed him so much. So Henry's like, okay, why don't you show me your apartment? Let's go check out where you live. Maybe I can drop off my bags. And Victor's like, okay, just give me 1 second. And when they get back to his apartment, he runs upstairs to make sure that the creature is not still in his bedroom. And when he confirms and makes sure that the creature is gone, he feels immense relief. And he's like, okay, awesome. Come on up, Henry. It's the coast is clear. Henry pretty quickly notices that Victor's not doing well. Like I said, he's like emaciated and pale and looks like someone who hasn't left the lab to go feel sunshine on his skin in years, which is the case. And his apartment is a mess. His lab is a mess. All of his chemistry instruments are all over the place. So Henry's kind of like, okay, so there was a reason you were not answering your dad's letters, and there was a reason why your dad was worried. Victor falls into kind of like a nervous fever. It's like the kind of thing where when someone finally asks you if you're okay, you break down and cry. So now that there's finally like a safe person around him who knows him and loves him like a brother, Victor just breaks down and he spends months bedridden, sick, feverish, ranting about what he's done incoherently. And Henry's just at his bedside, taking care of him, nursing him back to health, having no idea what brought this on, what the impetus is for Victor's apparent insanity. But Henry does him the favor of not telling Victor's father or Elizabeth what's going on with him because he doesn't want to worry them. He knows his family has recently lost Caroline, Victor's mother. And so he's like, okay, I am not telling them what's going on with you. Henry's a great friend. He's really selfless. And he is doting on Victor. So he's sick all winter. And then finally, sometime in spring, he recovers and he suddenly jumps out of bed feeling better. So Henry implores him to finally write back to his family, give them some peace of mind. And just as Victor is about to write home, he sees that he has also just received a letter from his dear cousin, quote unquote cousin, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth updates Victor on everything that he's missed back in Switzerland. At this point, Ernest is about 16 years old and William is about 5 years old. And they're doing great. They've both grown so much. Elizabeth says everything is lovely with the two brothers. Then there's some juicy gossip about a girl named Justine Moritz over here over my shoulder. Justine is a family friend whose mother was widowed when Justine was young. And the mother kind of blamed all of her problems on Justine and just treated her really horribly, was really cruel to her. And Justine was such a nice, sweet girl that the whole family loved. So Victor's mom took her into their home as a servant. But Elizabeth makes a point to talk about how servants in Geneva are treated much better than they are in France or England because their society is much more egalitarian. And just because you're a servant doesn't mean that you sacrifice any kind of dignity or mutual respect with other people. So taking Justine in as a servant was like not a bad gig for Justine. And it was a marked improvement in her circumstances coming from her own home. And Victor's mom really liked the sweet Justine, so she also educated her and basically treated her like another one of the kids in the house. Justine absolutely adored and was dedicated to Victor's mom in return and would have done anything for the family. She was very grateful. But after Victor's mom passed away, Justine's mom called her back to the family, essentially, and Justine moved back in with her mom, who was seemingly apologetic and like said she was going to start treating Justine better, but in reality, she really didn't start treating Justine better. She still would get into like bursts of rage and yell at Justine and blame everything on her. Justine's mom eventually also passed away, and Justine then finally came back to live with the Frankensteins. So basically, she's like, remember Justine? Well, this happened, and she went back with her mom, and then her mom died, so now she's back with us. Yay, we love Justine. Good news. Now, dear Victor, I dare say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. Completely irrelevant to the plot, will never come up again, but a nice full paragraph of petty Geneva gossip for Victor. Thank you, Cousin Elizabeth. Thank you very much for that. Victor is so happy to hear from her, and he writes back right away, reassuring her and his dad and everyone he's fine now. Sorry, I went MIA for 2 years, but everything is fine. Then Victor takes Henry finally on like a proper tour of the university. He introduces Henry to the two professors that he met on his first day at Ingolstadt, Professor Kremp and Professor Waldman. Both of the professors try to basically sing Victor's praises to Henry, and Victor hates it. He like doesn't want to have any discussion of chemistry. All he can think about when they bring it up is the terrible thing he's done, the terrible creature he's created. So he tries to like distract himself by getting into Henry's studies of Oriental literature and poetry. Henry's really into the Persian and Arabic poets. Same, Henry, good taste. And Victor talks about finding comfort in the more like romantic and passionate, soft love story type writing of these Eastern writers as compared to the ideals of masculinity in Greco-Roman literature. And you get a lot of moments like this in Frankenstein where Mary Shelley is constantly referencing, like in Victor's voice or in Captain Walton's voice, constantly referencing literature and poetry of the time. She's always referencing Dante. She quotes and references her husband Percy Shelley quite a bit. And this is just like another kind of caveat of clearly someone who's like very passionate about literature and poetry, inserting it into the narrative in a way that like maybe is not totally necessary, but if you get it and if you want to engage with it, it's so layered and rich and it's there for you to do that with. And it does make sense why Victor would seek kind of like an escapism in that, in something totally foreign and different to what he had been raised on. The fact that he created this creature out of pride and ego is such a Greek tragedy. It makes sense why he would steer away from those kinds of stories and want to read something different to get his mind off of it. So Victor's supposed to go home that fall, but the weather was really bad, like when they were supposed to travel. So he got delayed again and has to wait until spring to travel home. May rolls around. He's still just like enjoying the weather and socializing and going around town with Henry, really kind of dilly-dallying, taking his time, saying goodbye to the university and to Bavaria before he goes. You get kind of a bad feeling because he just keeps delaying going home. At this point, he hasn't been home for almost 5 years, and he's still kind of dragging his feet on it because now he feels like everything is awesome in the world. He's so happy. His best friend is in town. The weather is great. He has literally like never been happier or in better spirits since we've known him. But we as the audience are kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And in the beginning of chapter 7, the other shoe thuds to the ground. Okay, so he gets a letter from his dad. And his dad doesn't mince words. Pretty quickly, he says, look, I'm sorry, son. I have really bad news for you. William is dead. William is the baby brother who's only 5 or 6 years old at this point, William has been murdered. Goodbye, cute William. So the story goes that the whole family had gone for a little walk, and William was like kind of lagging behind. He got lost, and all of a sudden, like, they realized they didn't know where William was. They looked for him all night, and finally they found him dead with a handprint around his neck as though he had been strangled to death. Elizabeth is inconsolable. She has blamed herself. She thinks it's all her fault because before they left on this like day-long hike excursion, William had begged her to let him wear this necklace that he loved that was like a locket with a photo of their mother in it. And it was clearly like kind of an expensive heirloom piece of jewelry, and it was not around his neck when they found his dead body. So Elizabeth thinks that he was murdered so that the killer could steal the expensive jewelry, and that therefore it's all her fault because she should never have let him wear it out in the first place. And Victor's dad is like, obviously it's not her fault, no one blames her, but she's really inconsolable. Obviously this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to us. Don't come home angry, don't come home full of hatred for your enemies or for whoever did this. Just come home with love in your heart and we can all get through this together. Truly like the most loving, emotionally caring parents throughout this story, time and time again, especially his dad, because we lose his mom pretty early in the story, but his dad is just like unconditionally loving and supportive. And he says what feels like all the right things. Like, I'm not going to try to console you about this grief. I know this is inconsolable. There's nothing we can say or do to make this better. Just come home and be together. Victor is shattered. Henry can tell just by looking at Victor's face as he reads the letter that something terrible has happened. And then Victor gives Henry the letter and Henry realizes what's happened as well. It's been a while since we've talked about the 1818 version, but this was another interesting deviation. There's a brief discussion of grief kind of philosophically between Henry and Victor. And in 1831, when Henry reads the letter and realizes that William has been killed in this terrible way, he starts crying as well. He's crying with Victor. He says, "We have one consolation. His friends mourn and weep, but he is at rest. The pang is over. His sufferings are at an end forever. A sod covers his gentle form, and he knows no pain. He can no longer be a subject for pity. We must reserve that for his miserable survivors." In 1818, Henry says something similar. He says, "He can no longer be a fit subject for pity. The survivors are the greatest sufferers, and for them, time is the only consolation. Those maxims of the Stoics that death was no evil, and that the mind of man ought to be superior to despair on the eternal absence of a beloved object, ought not to be urged. Even Cato wept over the dead body of his brother." So it's a similar sentiment where he's saying like, well, it kind of sucks more for you guys who are still alive and have to mourn him than it does for him. Like, he's free and at rest. But he just goes on a bit more in 1818, explicitly pushing back against what Stoicism has to say about grief, that it's basically irrational and a waste of energy. He's saying like, no, that's ridiculous. Of course, grief is terrible. Of course you have to weep for your brother. There's no escaping that. Like, that is the human experience. And I did think that was beautiful in 1818. I don't know why we cut it out exactly or shortened it, but I feel like so much of Frankenstein is about death and loss and grief. It's good to soak up everything that Mary Shelley had to say about it. Okay, so as he says, Victor immediately starts traveling home to Switzerland. And when he starts getting close to the area where the family had been walking when William was killed, he gets out of his carriage and he decides to walk on foot a bit, kind of just to like say goodbye to William. He's walking during like a terrible storm. As always in this story, there's a huge storm. And he's feeling all of these like really deep feelings in the midst of the storm. And he calls out like into the mountains, into the wild, "William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge." As I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon. And all of a sudden, Victor realizes that it must in fact have been the wretch who killed his brother William. He won't be able to tell his family. So he's going home to his family and they're supposed to all be able to support each other in this terrible grief. But he can't really tell them because they're going to think that he's gone mad. They're going to think he's mad with grief or something. They won't believe him. And he's kind of cursed and doomed to bear the burden of this knowledge of what he has done and the fact that he's indirectly responsible for the child William's death. He has to bear that burden on his own. And that is a massive weight on his shoulders. As if things could not get any worse, when Victor finally arrives home, Ernest, his 16-year-old brother who is still alive, tells him that they already know who the killer is. And Victor's like, what? That's impossible. Only I know who the killer is. How could you guys know who the killer is? And Ernest says, I know, it's so terrible. Who would have ever thought that Justine could do something like that? And Victor's like, what? Justine? You guys think Justine murdered William? And yeah, Dad confirms it. Everyone thinks Justine killed William except for Elizabeth. Elizabeth refuses to believe it. She just is the only one who is 10 toes down behind Justine saying, there's no way. I know this girl. She did not kill the child. And now Victor as well. They don't know why. They don't know what's making him so certain, but he is certain also that it was not Justine. Elizabeth is so relieved. She's like, oh my gosh, Victor, I knew you would get it. I knew you would have my back. We have to make sure that she's not convicted. And her trial is later that day. Justine's going to be put on trial for the murder of William, and they're all going to go. And pretty quickly too, Alphonse Frankenstein, Victor's father, and his brother Ernest are on board, and they're like, okay, well, I hope you guys are right. I really hope it's not Justine. I didn't want to believe it. That's terrible if true. So let's just hope it's not her and she will not be put to the death penalty. Okay. And at first, Victor is like feeling pretty confident. He's like, I know for a fact that it wasn't her. So what evidence could they possibly have? Like, what circumstantial evidence could they possibly have that would make them so certain that Justine was the killer, right? Like, surely the justice system will work out like it always does. I'm sure everything will be fair and rational in court, and we will just get this misunderstanding sorted out, and we'll make sure that Justine gets home safe, right? Well, not really. Chapter 8 is the final chapter in volume 1, and it covers Justine's trial. She's on trial for the murder of William. Okay, so they all go to court that day when Victor has just gotten home, and Victor is distraught. During the whole of this wretched mockery of justice, I suffered living torture. It was to be decided whether the result of my curiosity and lawless devices would cause the death of my fellow beings. One, a smiling babe full of innocence and joy, William. The other, far more dreadfully murdered, with every aggravation of infamy that could make the murder memorable in horror, Justine. Because she'll be put to the death penalty if she's found guilty. As much as he might want to take the blame and say it wasn't Justine, it was me, he literally can't because there's so much evidence that he was not present at the time of the murder, that he was in Ingolstadt, that, again, they would just call him crazy, right? So, I mean, at least according to Victor telling his story to Captain Walton, he's like, I would have thrown myself on the sword for Justine, but I literally couldn't. Justine is consistently described as being remarkably beautiful, angelic looking. She is calm, but there's so much evidence, as it turns out, that she has no explanation for. Okay, so she was not with the family when they went on their walk because she had taken the day off to go visit her aunt nearby. And so on her way back from visiting her aunt, she heard word in the area. Everyone was talking about this missing child, and she realized who it was. So she joined in the search looking for him. She stayed out looking for him, and then it was too late for her to get back to their lake house because the gates of the city close at a certain time. Like I think at midnight or something, the gates of Geneva close. So she was stuck and she had to spend the night. She slept the night in a barn. And when she woke up, people saw her. Like there's witnesses who saw her that morning around where and when the body was found. She has no alibi to prove that she was not present at the time the child was killed. And on top of everything, that fancy locket that Elizabeth let William wear that had a photo of their dead mother, they found the locket on Justine's person in her clothes. So it's not looking great for Justine, and she has no explanation for this. And she's very honest in saying, like, I don't know what to tell you. I cannot explain why I had that locket. I have no memory of it. I never took it. I don't know why it's on me. She mentions how she thought she maybe heard someone at some point during the night, but she didn't fully wake up. And then when she did wake up, no one was there. Maybe there's an explanation in that for the locket, but it's just nothing concrete enough. Elizabeth cannot abide. Elizabeth speaks up and says, she wants to come to Justine's defense, and she talks about how much Justine has been a part of their family and how they all love her, and she would never, never, never harm William in a million years, no matter what, no matter the locket, nothing. It doesn't matter. There's no way Justine could ever do this. But this kind of backfires because everyone is then extra sympathetic towards Elizabeth, who they see as this like naive, innocent benefactor of Justine. And they're even more pissed off at Justine for her ingratitude towards this family who took her in and treated her so well. They're like, wow, these people are such lovely people. They adore you. And what do you do in return? You kill a child, all for what? For one fancy piece of jewelry? So the crowd is not on Justine's side. And even though Elizabeth was trying to help, ultimately her testimony just makes it worse. Victor is thinking that the creature has gone so far as to frame Justine. He doesn't know how. He doesn't know how the creature would have known to do this or had the cunning to do this, but he is pretty sure that somehow the creature planted the locket on Justine and framed her for this murder. And Victor is so tormented by this idea that he is really feeling sorry for himself. He says, "The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold." So Victor has these moments of intense self-pity where he really truly believes that he has it worse than anyone on earth, even though he acknowledges that it's his own fault. But the feeling of guilt and shame and remorse is so crushing to him that he envies everyone around him, even if in theory, they're suffering more or they're being put through worse externally. He envies their innocence, that no matter how horrible the world is to them, at least they can sleep at night. And this reminded me a lot of Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And throughout this book, a lot of the kind of raving mad musings of Victor as he torments himself with guilt over his creation of the creature and all of the deaths that follow, it reminds me a lot of Crime and Punishment. And Raskolnikov, spoiler alert, I guess, after committing a murder himself, is so racked with guilt and remorse that he essentially loses his mind. This felt very much like that. And I tried to look up if Dostoevsky had read Frankenstein or at all had talked about being inspired by Frankenstein, but I couldn't find anything. So it's possible, but we don't know whether or not that's the case. I don't know, but sound off in the comments. Let me know if you also get a Raskolnikov vibe from our dear Victor. Despite their efforts in court, the next day, Justine is unanimously condemned to the death penalty for committing murder. Elizabeth is devastated. Justine requests to speak to Elizabeth before she dies, and Elizabeth basically strong arms Victor into coming with her. She's like, "I'm not going alone. You have to come with me." So Elizabeth and Victor go to visit Justine, and they find out that Justine had confessed after all to the murder, and Elizabeth is betrayed. She's like, "I stood 10 toes down for you. I defended you with everything in me. I swore up and down you could never do this, and you swore you didn't either, and then you confessed? Are you kidding me?" But Justine explains that she was coerced into a confession. They basically just kept asking her over and over again. Typical kind of coerced confession tactics. They convinced her. They were basically saying at least if you admit it now, maybe you'll still get into heaven, but you continue to lie about it, you're never going to get into heaven. They guilt her and shame her and confuse her. And finally, she just confessed just to get it over with. And maybe as a last ditch effort to seek God's forgiveness and get into heaven, even though she knew deep down that she had not done anything wrong. Instantly, Elizabeth accepts this explanation and once again believes her innocence innocence and is relieved. Justine and Elizabeth in this scene have a slightly different exchange from 1818. Again, I kind of want to highlight this change. So in 1831, Justine is kind of resigned gracefully to her fate. She says, "I do not fear to die. That pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. I leave a sad and bitter world. I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Learn from me, dear lady, to submit in patience to the will of heaven." And she's talking to Elizabeth when she says, "Learn from me to submit." In 1818, Justine is a little bit different. She says, "Dear sweet Elizabeth, do not weep. You ought to raise me with thoughts of a better life and elevate me from the petty cares of this world of injustice and strife. Do not you, excellent friend, drive me to despair." So she's still kind of consoling Elizabeth in this moment before her own death, but instead of saying like, "We must submit to the will of heaven, whatever God wills, so be it. Let's not complain about what God is doing." In this version, she's kind of saying like, "Come on, you can't make me feel worse about this. Let's think better thoughts. Let's pretend things are better than they are because I can't stand this pain." It's different. Elizabeth also, for her part, kind of goes on a rant about the injustice of the world that is pretty much removed in 1831. So she says, "Oh, how I hate this world's shows and mockeries. When one creature is murdered, another is immediately deprived of life in a slow, torturing manner. Then the executioners, their hands yet reeking with the blood of innocents, believe that they have done a great deed. They call this retribution. Hateful name. Yet this is not consolation for you, my Justine, unless indeed that you may glory in escaping from so miserable a den. Alas, I would I were in peace with my aunt and my lovely William, escaped from a world which is hateful to me, and the visages of men which I abhor." Most of the time, I can appreciate both of the 1818 and 1831 versions of a given conversation, but in this case, I really prefer 1818. It feels so much more raw and human and genuine, this exchange, right before Justine knows she's about to be executed, where she's saying like she is feeling despair and she is feeling angry and she just wants to think of something else in her last hours and try to like cling on to something hopeful. And Elizabeth can't help but be enraged by the injustice of the world, and something about it feels very teenage, this teenage wrath at injustice as you realize you experience your first like big girl situations and adult problems, hopefully, and you realize how unfair life is, and it's infuriating, and it goes against everything that you were taught to believe in. You're taught to believe in justice, in systems of authority and power, and then when those systems fail you personally, when those systems create tragedy for you personally, you feel enraged. And I think it's so natural and normal for Elizabeth to have this reaction and for Justine to pretty much share her same feelings. Whereas in 1831, they are more of these symbols of feminine selflessness and heavenly sacrifice, where Justine is like, "It's God's will. I have nothing against it. I'm ready to die. It's okay." More like a martyr. And Elizabeth is more just silently crying, not exclaiming her anger with the system. In 1831, Elizabeth does still proclaim her desire to die. She says, "I wish that I were to die with you. I cannot live in this world of misery." It really is quite tragic. Elizabeth sitting there with her closest girlfriend, just crying and weeping together, knowing that she's going to die. It does feel very like biblical almost. And Victor, meanwhile, they are praising him and thanking him for coming to Justine's defense and for believing in her innocence despite everything. Meanwhile, on the inside, he's exploding because he doesn't deserve any gratitude from them. And he knows that. But finally, they have to say goodbye and they go. And the next day, Justine is hung. Goodbye to our precious Justine. Torn by remorse, horror, and despair, I beheld those I loved spend vain sorrow upon the graves of William and Justine, the first hapless victims to my unhallowed arts. End of Volume 1. Volume 1 of 3 is done, and the train wreck has kind of just started. So buckle up. Volume 2, most of Volume 2 is spent on the creature's story. But in order to get there, we have a couple of slightly tedious chapters still from Victor's point of view. Some very dramatic descriptions of his guilt and remorse, which I feel like I've already talked a lot about. He is feeling really lonely and isolated because his father, who again is very loving and is trying to like understand and comfort Victor and Elizabeth both, they don't know really what's plaguing him. They don't know why his grief and suffering seems different and somehow worse than what they are feeling at their own loss and grief. He spends nights literally just sitting in a boat floating on the lake, trying to fight the urge to end his own life, literally only for the sake of his family and not wanting to cause them even more suffering. But he has no will to live of his own. He feels this constant, intense dread of the creature and also a desire for revenge against the creature. So he is just consumed with these dark thoughts. The only thing that really brings Victor any comfort at this time is the Alps. He sees the vastness of nature, the scale of it, the greatness of it, the fact that no matter what, the seasons will come and go, and that makes him feel comfortingly insignificant and like maybe the entire world is not himself and his problems. Very real and very relatable. I thought that I get that same feeling when like hiking or stargazing or at the beach looking at the ocean, just that feeling of like, I am small, I am a speck, the world is bigger than me, and my problems are dwarfed by the rest of the universe. He goes on kind of a overnight trip through the mountains, and he is just hiking higher and higher up in the Alps. Chapter 2 is more magnificent nature, beautiful prose. Mary Shelley quotes her father's writing on human destiny and a poem by her husband in this chapter, both very sweet. And similar to how Victor got kind of like caught up in the storm when he was exploring near William's place of death and he like called out into nature and then all of a sudden he saw the creature. A similar thing happens here where Victor is like out on a glacier basically and he calls out, "Wandering spirits, allow me this faint happiness or take me as your companion away from the joys of life." As I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance advancing towards me with superhuman speed. So Victor is like calling out to the ghosts of his mother, of William, of Justine. And right as he says this, he sees his creation, his creature, running towards him over this like glacier of ice that took Victor hours to like carefully walk across. This huge 8-foot tall monster is sprinting at him. So Victor is absolutely terrified, but he's also resolved to engage in mortal combat. He keeps saying mortal combat, but he basically wants to fight to the death with this creature and sees this as his opportunity. As soon as the thing is close enough, Victor starts attacking him verbally, calling him a miserable wretch, how dare you, blah, 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 blah. And to his surprise, the wretch, the creature, responds very eloquently and calmly. He speaks almost like very formally, and he is proposing just a conversation. He just wants to talk to Victor. He wants to sit down with him, tell him his side of the story, and that's all he's asking for. Victor continues to attack him, scream at him, and the creature's kind of like, calm down, man. Hey, take a chill pill, take a deep breath. Let's have a civil, logical, rational conversation just between two guys, okay? And the irony, of course, is that Victor is acting more like the wild beast, and the wild beast is acting more like the educated gentleman. However, he is giving kind of a brutal ultimatum to Victor. He's saying, you have to sit down and hear me out, or else I am going to go on a killing spree and a rampage and kill a bunch of humans. So would you rather that, or would you rather have one single conversation with me? Because those are your two options. Victor is like, I can't even look at you. How can I listen to you talk when I can't even look at you? And the creature covers Victor's eyes with his hands. He goes like that. He goes, well, now you can listen to me. Yeah, he's like incapable of looking upon the face of the thing that he himself created. It's so ugly he can't look. And again, this speaks to Victor's and everyone's, really, humanity's intense superficiality, and the way that even before the creature did anything horrible, Victor saw him as horrible because he was so hideous. So whether or not the creature had committed these terrible murders, Victor was already looking at him in this way. So now the creature just kind of is over it. And it's like, well, if you really hate looking at me that much, close your eyes, because you made me, you owe me at the very least a conversation. And he does kind of get through to Victor beyond just Victor's fear and beyond the threat of mass murder. Victor is moved by the argument that he owes him something as a creator. And he does feel like, okay, I've been a bit unfair. I am responsible for this creature's existence. I guess I do owe him hearing him out and having a conversation. So the creature's like, all right, well, it's too cold out here for your fragile little human body. Come with me. I have a hut. We'll make a fire. We'll sit. We'll talk. And by the time the sun goes down, by the end of the day, I will have finished telling you my story and you can decide what to do next. So Victor agrees. There's a lot of like biblical references here. The creature says, remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. And in turn, Victor is calling him devil, etc. He talks very like biblical Old Englishy. Still thou canst listen to me and grant me thy compassion. Okay, so chapter 3 of volume 2, we finally get into the narrative from the point of view of the creature. So we're going to go back in the timeline and we're overlapping with the last 2+ years of Victor's life since he created the creature. And we're hearing the creature side of the story, what he's been up to during that time. This also starts pretty slow, but he is in the forest near Ingolstadt and he's just discovering his basic senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. He's literally just figuring out how his senses work. He is cold, vulnerable, scared. He cries alone in the forest, unsure of what to do. The only comfort he finds is the bright moon in the sky. I thought that was so human and beautiful to like look to the sky and look to the moon. It's the same way that Victor goes into nature and looks at the mountains to feel any kind of comfort and connection. He discovers fire left behind by some humans, and he discovers how to cook food. He mostly survives on just like berries, nuts, and roots, but he's always hungry, always starving. He spends all of his time searching for food and shelter and surviving. His first interaction with a human who is not Victor, he finds like a hut in the countryside and terrifies the shepherd away accidentally just with his appearance. And once the shepherd runs away, he eats his lunch and takes a nap by the fire. He finds a village bustling with like human activity and homes and people cooking, and it looks amazing. But when he tries to enter a cottage, he also, again, scares the crap out of them and everyone runs away, and he gets chased out of the village by an angry mob with pitchforks and torches, basically. So he learns the hard way by exposure not to be seen by humans, that if humans see him, they are terrified, they'll freak out, and they'll hurt him. So instead, he finds this cottage in the countryside and finds a way to hide in this sort of barn that's attached to the side of the cottage that they don't really use anymore. Let me change out the University of Ingolstadt for our new setting. Hold on. Okay, so he finds a little cottage like this in the countryside, and there's this little attached barn hovel thing where he can hide out, and he can look through like the slats of wood, and he can watch the family inside the cottage as well. So the family consists of 3 members at first. There's a young girl, a young man, and an old man. And that's our family right here, right next to me. I bet you've been wondering this whole time, who are those people? So there's this old man and then his 2 kids, a young woman and a young man, okay? And they're poor and they're tired and they're sad, but they love each other so much. and they take care of each other. The old man plays music on an instrument and moves the girl to tears just by the beauty of the music. And the creature watches on and is devastated to realize that this kind of familial love and safety exists and that he will never have it, and he doesn't have it himself. He smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food. And I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. So this wretch, this creature, this demon, according to Victor, is feeling really, really big, deep feelings and emotions and longing for connection and love in the way that any human being would. So for the next few months, the creature, even though he longs to join them, he knows that he would terrify them, and so he holds back. He just watches them and learns their routine. One way or another, eventually the creature realizes that the old man is actually blind. And once he realizes that they're poor and that they're like struggling to feed themselves, he stops taking any of their food and he decides to help them out in any way he can. So for one thing, he notices that the young man is always going out to collect firewood. And so instead, at night, when they're all in bed, the creature goes out into the woods and he collects firewood for them. And every morning he leaves it on their doorstep, and they are just amazed and so happy and think that there's some benevolent spirit looking out for them. He practices speaking by watching and listening to them speak. He practices the motions of speaking to himself and learns how to speak. He listens to them as they read aloud to the old man. And every time he sees his own reflection out in a pond or something, or in a puddle, he is just mortified. He realizes how hideous and ugly he is, and the more self-aware he grows, the more self-loathing he develops. He's hoping that maybe if he can master language, maybe if he can be really eloquent and well-spoken and well-read, somehow people can overlook his hideous appearance at some point in the future. He shovels snow for them. He does all sorts of secret little guardian angel house fairy things to make their lives easier because he loves them and he loves being able to do something helpful. He likes seeing them happy. He almost sees them as gods. He sees them as these superior beings to himself, and he fantasizes about one day showing himself to them and winning them over. So a lot of his mental space is occupied by these like maladaptive daydreams. He is always daydreaming and imagining what could be, fantasizing about a life with these wonderful, lovely people. Soon spring comes around, and it's his first spring being alive. He was born in November. He has lived through the winter with them. And as spring comes around and the snow thaws and the plants start to grow again, he is just full of hope and excitement and happiness and belief in new beginnings. But just like when Victor was so happy to be hanging out with Henry and Ingolstadt in the springtime, we as the reader feel a sense of deep foreboding. All right, I'm not going to lie to you. It's the next day. I don't know what to tell you. Life gets crazy. These videos take hours on hours to record, and that's okay. It's worth it. But I'm just going to continue trying to do my hair and makeup exactly the same way and hope it doesn't feel like a bunch of different days of recording spliced together. If it makes you feel any better mentally, I'm in it the whole way through, even when I have to leave to go to art class or cat sitting or dinner. Okay? Just trust me. I'm locked in with you on Frankenstein this whole time. Anyway, shall we carry on? Chapter 5, Volume 2, a brand new bombshell enters the cottage, and that is this beautiful Arabian woman named Safie. So I don't know at what point we find out all of the names of the people in the cottage, but this is Old Man de Lacy, his son Felix de Lacy, and his daughter Agatha de Lacy. Okay, this is the nuclear family. We'll get their whole backstory in a minute, but one day, this beautiful woman arrives and she is speaking a different language, but the creature is able to work out that she's asking for Felix. And Felix is just absolutely elated to see her. He's been like the saddest one of them all. They all have been kind of sad and down, and the creature just kind of figured it was because they were poor and like clearly struggling to make ends meet. But even within that, like Felix has always been particularly down and out. But when he sees Safie, he is elated and just absolutely so thrilled to see her. He's like kneeling at her feet, kissing her hand, so excited to introduce her to his father. He calls her his sweet Arabian, and she goes to kiss the old man's hand in like a respectful greeting, but he embraces her warmly. They are all embracing her and thrilled to have her. So because she speaks a different language than they do, I think they're in the French countryside and they're speaking French. They start giving her French lessons. And very luckily for the creature, he can kind of listen in and also take the lessons with her, kind of, and take advantage of the fact that they're giving language instruction to their new guest. So he starts learning along with her. And after like 2 months of her being there, he can understand most of what everyone is saying in the cottage at any given time, which his like learning and cognitive development is very fast, the same way that like a child's would be. Like children have extra high neuroplasticity and the language centers of their brain are extra absorbent at a young age. And he's kind of like a baby in the world in a gigantic body. So he learns really quickly as well. Safie also connects with them through music. Remember, the old man would sometimes play music and Agatha would sing. So she plays the guitar and sings very beautifully, and it's like a different style of music than any of them have heard before, and it almost moves the old man to tears listening to her play. The more the creature knows, the more he realizes about the world, the more he wishes he could live in blissful ignorance. And you see a lot of these moments of kind of parallels between his inner monologue and Victor's monologue to Captain Walton, because Victor is telling Captain Walton, you know, the search for knowledge, this relentless search for knowledge and discovery is a curse. It's only going to lead you down worse and worse paths. You know, ignorance is bliss. The man who stays in his hometown is happier than the man who adventures. Don't fly too close to the sun, etc., etc. At the same time, the creature is kind of having similar realizations. He says, "Sorrow only increased with knowledge. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, nor known nor felt beyond the sensations of hunger, thirst, and heat. Of what a strange nature is knowledge. It clings to the mind, like a lichen on the rock." And again, I feel like I've mentioned this a few times, but I sense some like biblical parallels to the Garden of Eden, the fruit of knowledge, that once Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of knowledge, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden and cast down to earth. And it feels like the creature is learning a similar lesson. Chapter 6, we finally get the full backstory of who the DeLacy family and the cottage are and how Safie came to be connected with them, okay? So they were originally a very wealthy and well-respected family in Paris. So similar to the Frankensteins in Geneva, they were kind of an analogous class and wealth level, but in Paris, okay? And that was just a few months ago. Safie's father is a Turkish merchant who was living and working in Paris. And he got in trouble with the government, and the people of Paris suspected that the government was mostly just targeting him for being Muslim and foreign and having too much money and being too successful, rather than him having done anything particularly harmful or illegal. He was put to the death penalty after his trial for whatever minor, like, commercial dispute, which outrages the public, who see this as extremely unfair and prejudiced. And Felix, the young man, was so moved by this case and so outraged by the injustice in the legal system that he actually went and tried to free the Turkish man, Safie's father, from prison and help him get out and flee France. Felix really had pure intentions and a pure heart in doing this. Like he wasn't asking for anything in return, no payment, nothing. He was really just like on moral grounds opposed to this man being put to the death penalty. Of course, again, we see a strong parallel with what happened to Justine, which we'll get to that. But when he goes to visit the man and help him plan how to escape, he also meets the man's daughter, Safie. And Safie is so grateful to him. She thanks him profusely in whatever like broken way they can communicate. And he can't help but think to himself, okay, maybe the universe will reward me for this good deed with a chance at her hand in marriage once I successfully help this man out, okay? And it's like a fine line. Like, he's not really being creepy and weird about it. She is just like beautiful and kind and grateful. He's not doing this good deed in order to get her, but he's like, I mean, it wouldn't be a bad deal. It wouldn't be a bad outcome. I wouldn't be opposed if she's into it. Okay. And why would she be into it? Well, Safie's mother was a Christian Arab, interestingly enough. Her mother was a Christian Arab who had been enslaved by the Turks. And it's not totally explicit that she was forced to marry her father, but it does kind of feel that way. Or maybe not forced, but like financially, her circumstances made it very advantageous to marry this wealthy merchant rather than be enslaved. And so because her mother came from a Christian area of the Arab world, or at least according to Mary Shelley, because of that, she was highly educated and came from a more egalitarian society than the Turkey that Safie's father knew. So she raised Safie with an education that other girls in Turkey might not have been receiving. And also just with the knowledge that like there was more possible for a girl than just to grow up and be a wife, that you could have an education and have more freedom and be a person, not be as beholden to patriarchy as the Turkish Muslim society would have had women be. Mary Shelley is really Mrs. Worldwide in this book. She's very fascinated, I feel, by the Middle East and by a kind of very British Orientalism of the time. But it's not a crazy story. I have to say, I did not expect for there to be a character in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818 or 1831, depending on your persuasion. I did not expect for there to be a character who sounded like me. I'm a Christian Arab family. I thought that was pretty cool. And of course, she's described as having fair skin and being extremely beautiful, but we'll take what we can get. She's extremely beautiful and she's foreign. Yay. There historically have been, and there are today, like Christians all over the Middle East and the Arab world, but she could very well have been from what is today Lebanon, from the Mount Lebanon area. Brief history lesson. Part of the reason why certain areas did not convert to Islam during either the Muslim conquests or the Turkish conquests of the Levantine areas is because of geography. So Mount Lebanon is a mountain. That's where my family is from, generations and generations back. And especially the Turks were kind of like, you know what, as long as you pay your taxes and mind your business, we're not going to go all the way up the mountain to every village and make you convert. Like, we don't care, really. Just pay your taxes. It wasn't worth the expense militarily necessarily to conquer all of those villages. So in more remote, rural, mountainous, difficult to reach areas, people were less likely to convert to Islam. Anyway, that's irrelevant. You can't bring up anything tangentially related to Lebanon without me mentioning something about Lebanon. Sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I'm like that kid that's like, this one time at band camp, but instead of band camp, it's Lebanon. This one time in Lebanon. Anyway, so it would make sense that Safie might like to marry a French man and stay in Paris, where she could live a life by some degree less restrained by patriarchy than if she went back to Turkey with her father. Anyway, so Felix helps her father get out and flee all the way to somewhere in Italy, and there were kind of waiting a bit in Italy for him to arrange his journey back to Turkey. Safie is with him in Italy, spending as much time as she can with him before he goes back to Turkey, at which point she will return to France to marry Felix. And her father agrees to this, on the surface at least. He says he agrees to it, but secretly he's plotting to abscond with his daughter back to Turkey, and he's not going to let her stay behind in Paris with this man. Even if this man saved him and freed him from prison, he still wants to take his daughter back to Turkey with him. So for a few weeks in Italy, Safie and Felix get to spend time together, and it's very pure and innocent. They just get to know each other. They have translators help them communicate. She sings to him. They're really excited to get married, and they genuinely do really like each other and have this connection, besides the fact that he thinks she's beautiful and she thinks that he's a convenient ticket to Western Europe. A little hiccup in their plan comes out when DeLacy and Agatha, Felix's father and sister, end up in trouble with the law because it was pretty easy to figure out what Felix had done and pin it on him. And the French government basically tried to lure him back to Paris by punishing his loved ones instead. So they were imprisoned, and Felix had to go back to negotiate their freedom and deal with the French government. So he's like, okay, well, you stay here. I just need to go deal with this, and then I'll come back and get you, or you'll come to Paris, whatever. That's what he and Safie agreed on. Unfortunately, when he goes back to Paris and they deal with the government, have a trial and everything, about 5 months later, they find themselves convicted, stripped of all of their assets, and exiled from the country. Meanwhile, back in Italy, luckily for Safie, her father has to flee Italy as well, pretty shortly after Felix has to go back to Paris to save his family. So her father has to flee Italy and get back to Turkey ASAP because they're on to him for like extradition. And so he leaves his daughter Safie with all of the stuff. Like they have a lot of stuff to take on their move back to Turkey. And he's like, okay, I need to go on ahead so they don't catch me. You follow with all of the things and with some accompanying like servants, I think. But once he goes, Safie decides instead that she's going to track down her lost lover, Felix, and she's never going back to Turkey. She figures out where Felix is, tracks him down. So this little cottage is in Germany, which makes sense, right? Because the creature was at Ingolstadt at his like birth / inception, galvanism, and was wandering around the woods there, and that's where he found the cottage. So it's a French family speaking French in the cottage, but it's in Germany. Anyway, all of that journey of her tracking him down all the way from Italy and finding a way to the cottage, that's what has finally led her back there, and that's why Felix is so excited to have her. Chapter 7, we get a little bit repetitive here where it's kind of the same thing but to a higher ante over again in terms of the creature discovering more and more knowledge and then feeling worse and worse the more he knows. But this time he actually finds a couple of books in the woods. Someone has like dropped their satchel in the woods or something. And when he's out collecting firewood, he finds these books. One of them is Paradise Lost. Like I said, Mary Shelley loves a literary reference or a poetry reference in this book. And she referenced a lot of romantics. She references Milton's Paradise Lost almost constantly. And so it makes sense that the creature would find it and read it. Now, not only does he long for a family of origin, a name, a place in society, class, wealth, he's even more existential and he's longing for the feeling of having a creator or a god with whom he can convene. And so to him, that naturally becomes Victor. He had stolen a cloak from Victor's apartment in Ingolstadt before he started wandering out in the woods. And in that cloak were some of Victor's papers. Okay, so now that he's learned to read, he can actually read those papers and find out a little bit more about the man who created him. Luckily, there's a journal in the coat which covers the 4 months leading up to the creature's creation. So it details everything, including Victor's disgust and abhorrence for the creature, which is pretty harrowing for him to read about. So he's like, oh, okay, great. I can find out more about my creator, my God. Oh, he hates me and thinks I'm disgusting. Cool. He wishes he was never made in the first place. It's almost like he's going through adolescence in like a couple of weeks' time. Like he's going through this teenage angst phase of like, I wish I was never born. And knowing that his creator hates him, his only hope is to eventually show himself to the cottagers and beg their pity, right? Because if anyone in the world were going to overlook his hideousness and give him a chance at personhood, he thinks it would be his creator. But since that's clearly not an option based on Victor's journal, then his true only hope are these cottagers who he knows are good people. He knows these are loving, compassionate, selfless people based on their interactions with each other and the stories that they've told. So he now starts kind of hatching the seed of a plan in his mind of how he can one day reveal himself to them and become part of their family. His plan is to just spend a few more months improving his speaking and becoming more eloquent so as to better plead his case and scare them less. And also he just needs to procrastinate a little bit because he's too scared. Also, since Safie came, the family now has servants and some more free time. I think she was able to bring some of her money and jewels that she was supposed to take back to Turkey with her. And so that's why. So they pass the autumn and winter like that, living a little bit more comfortably. Creature is working up the courage and working up the speaking skills to confront the family. And his plan is to speak to the blind old man, De Lacy, alone at first. Because if any one of them were going to give him a chance, it would be the man who can't see. If he can just talk to the old man on his own, then the old man can talk on his behalf to the family and prepare them before they meet him and see him physically before they get scared. It's not a bad plan, and I have to say it is awfully convenient for him that one of the 4 humans he has a chance at connecting with is blind. So one sunny day, Safie, Agatha, and Felix go for a long country walk, and the old man is left on his own in the cottage. And the creature is freaking out. His heart is racing because he knows that this is his opportunity. He can speak extremely well now. He has no excuse, no reason to put it off any longer. This is his chance to do his plan and speak to the old man. So he crawls out of his hovel and goes and knocks on the front door of the cottage, and he pretends that he's a traveler. He would just like to sit for a moment by the fire and take a rest, if that's okay. And the creature's speaking French, so DeLacy's like, oh, like, are you also a Frenchman? And the creature's like, no, but I was educated by a French family. And he's kind of speaking in third person about DeLacy himself to DeLacy. So he's saying, I am now going to claim the protection of some friends whom I sincerely love and of whose favor I have some hopes. He talks about how he has no family, no friends. He's an outcast in the world, and these people he's going to ask for help are his only hope. And DeLacy is like, don't worry. I mean, if these friends are good, you'll be good. Don't worry about it. And the creature's like, yep, they're great, but they're prejudiced against me. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habit of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice which I wish to overcome. And it's sounding good. Like the old man is saying, of course, like I want to help you. I don't judge you. Look at me and my family. We're outcasted and we're unfortunate. So who are we to judge? Okay. So finally, when the old man says, may I know the names and residence of those friends? The creature's freaking out and he's so nervous, he collapses into the chair and he starts sobbing aloud. And as he's trying to like work up the courage to just spit it out and tell the old man, he can hear Felix, Agatha, and Safie coming back. He can hear them outside. They're on their way back to the cottage and they're getting close. So he's like freaking out. This is the moment of fate. This is going to decide if he will have a chance at a happy life or be condemned to being outcast forever in his mind. Seizing the hand of the old man, I cried, now is the time. Save and protect me. You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not you desert me in the hour of trial. Great God, exclaimed the old man, who are you? And then right that moment, the door of the cottage opens. Felix, Agatha, and Safie enter and they spot the creature talking to the old man and they obviously freak out. Agatha faints. Safie runs out. Felix jumps forward and tries to protect his father, who he thinks the creature is attacking. Felix starts beating up the creature with a stick. And of course, the creature is extremely giant and strong and could have squished Felix, but he doesn't want to hurt him still. My heart sunk within me as with bitter sickness. And he feels he is overcome by pain and anguish. So he runs out of the cottage and he's able, in like all the chaos of everything, he slips back into the hovel adjacent to the cottage without any of them seeing. But that was his one chance in his mind and he messed it up and he got the reaction that he gets from every human every time they see him. And he's just sick to his stomach, devastated about it. And it is pretty hard to read. All right, so chapter 8, volume 2, the creature starts out by going through kind of a mood swing that we see pretty frequently in himself and in Victor. So first he's outraged and he wants revenge. He feels betrayed by these people who he considered his friends, who he has been helping out anonymously at the cottage for months. He wants to wage war against humanity. He wants to wage war against Victor for bringing him into this world unwanted. And then after a while, he kind of calms down a little and he decides, no, he can try again. All is not lost. He can try again, talk to the old man next time the old man's alone and just take his time a bit more. It was too rushed. He didn't have enough time. That's all, but all is not lost. That's what he decides. Well, too bad, because the next day the cottagers have left they've abandoned the cottage, and he overhears Felix talking to the landlord saying that they're traumatized forever. They can never live here again. He knows he will have to pay out the remainder of their rent term or whatever, but it doesn't matter. They just can't live there anymore. So that kind of snuffs out any little spark of hope that had reignited with the creature. And that night, he lights the whole cottage on fire. It's a windy night. The wind blows in and it fans the flames of this fierce fire, just absolutely destroying the cottage that he had called home, where he had felt a chance at community. But ultimately, the cottage and the people in it failed him, just like everyone else. So what to do now? The creature decides that he will go to Geneva to find his creator and demand justice, because if these good humans who are completely selfless and open to other humans, if even they won't pay him any mind, if even they won't give him a chance, at least like on principle, he feels that his creator owes him something. Having brought him into the world, which he did not ask for, Victor owes him justice. And even though he knows that Victor hates him and finds him abhorrent from the journal, he now feels that he's left with no other option. So he takes this journey by foot in the middle of winter from the cottage in Germany all the way to Switzerland. And it is a bitter journey. It is cold. He has no shelter. He doesn't have proper clothing. He doesn't have enough food. And he just walks and walks and walks. And the more he suffers on this journey, the more bitter he grows. Again, he displays some like intense emotional volatility, almost like a toddler, where he's walking and it's cold and he's cursing all of humanity and he's cursing his creator and he's violent and he's feeling the urge to seek revenge. And then he wakes up and it's a beautiful sunny day and he's kind of walking through the woods and looking at the sun on the leaves and thinking, hey, maybe there's hope after all. And if that's not human, I don't know what is. It's extremely human. And in fact, it is so Victor. Victor has this emotional volatility and he will go out into nature seeking some kind of respite from his own tortured mind. And he'll see something beautiful and think, hey, maybe life's not so cursed after all. And this creature who doesn't know Victor, who Victor doesn't know, has such similar experiences and feelings and thoughts. And it's definitely on purpose on Mary Shelley's part to show that as much as Victor wants to separate himself from this monster, from the wretch, ultimately they are extremely similar, actually. Anyway, on one of those days where he's feeling kind of more hopeful, he sees a young girl who was like running ahead of her, I was going to say supervisor, who was running ahead of her guardian. She drowns, starts drowning in a stream. He rescues her. And then when the little girl's father or older brother, whoever catches up and sees the creature, he shoots him in return for saving the daughter. More rage, more bitterness, more promises for revenge, but critically also that gunshot wound kind of slows him down as he's approaching Geneva. Eventually, he's getting closer and he runs into another child, a very cute small child on his walk. And similar to the old man, he thinks maybe this is kind of like a weak link of humanity. This is someone who can potentially, or not a weak link, the opposite, a strong link, someone who won't be as blinded by the prejudices of other human adults. Maybe he can befriend the child. Maybe that can be his way in, right? So he's trying to talk to the kid and the kid is terrified, begs him to let him go. And when that doesn't work, he says, basically, do you know who my father is? And the creature says, who's your father? And the kid says, Frankenstein. And you'll regret this because my father is a very powerful man. Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim. The child struggled and loaded me with epithets which carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. So technically, he didn't mean to choke William to death because, of course, this is the story of how William died. He wasn't meaning to strangle him. He was meaning to silence him. But once he kills him and sees the child dead at his feet, he does not feel remorse. He feels triumph and he feels a sense of satisfaction that he can inflict pain on Victor and on other humans the way that Victor and other humans have inflicted so much pain on him. He likes the idea that this will cause Victor an immense amount of pain, and he doesn't regret doing it. After he kills the child, he notices something shiny that he's wearing, and he picks it up, and it is the locket with the photo of Caroline, Victor's deceased mother, which William was wearing, which is the locket that Elizabeth blamed herself for letting William wear and thought it was the reason he was murdered. But the creature doesn't even notice it until after William's already dead. And it's just a shiny thing. He picks it up and he looks at it and he's thinking how beautiful this woman is. And then he gets even angrier thinking about how even if he could gaze upon this beautiful woman in real life, she would only curse him and yell at him and be terrified of him. And he kind of stomps away looking for somewhere to hide for the night. He becomes a bit of an incel. Like his hatred for humanity, yes, it's primarily directed towards Victor and it's directed towards men as well as women, but the way that he resents women and beautiful women specifically is different. He specifically resents beautiful women for not wanting him, for the fact that he would never have the opportunity to feel the loving gaze of a beautiful woman because no one will look at him with anything less than sheer horror and disgust, let alone anything approaching attraction or admiration or love. So he really feels the sting of that. If he feels he's wronged and deprived of the opportunity for any kind of love and companionship, and he's extra angry at pretty girls and beautiful women for that. So it makes sense that when he finds the barn in which Justine had spent the night after the gates closed, he was going to hide out in that barn as well. And when he spots Justine, same train of thought. Wow, what a beautiful girl. How lovely she is. She would fucking hate me if she could see me. She would never give me the time of day. She would think I'm a monster. F her. I hate her for the fact that I will never have the love of a beautiful girl. Okay. And so he decides to frame her for the murder of William for the crime of being a beautiful girl. And the reason why he even knows how to frame someone or that this would get Justine in trouble with the law for William's death is because of the whole story that he overheard in the cottage about Safie's father and the French courts. So he had overheard enough like legal drama. Essentially, he watched a couple seasons of Law and Order and he figured he could frame Justine, and that's why he planted the locket on her. And he did, in fact, successfully frame her. He didn't know that Justine had any connection to the Frankenstein family. Like that part is a coincidence, but he did intentionally put the locket on her to frame her. And now that he has finally seen Victor and gotten to speak to him and tell him his side of the whole story, including being completely honest about killing Victor's brother, he throws down the gauntlet and finally states his demands. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. So there you have it. The reason he wanted to talk to Victor, the reason he wanted to have this little sit-down parlay is because he wants Victor to create for him a female companion who is as hideous and deformed as he is so that she will not be able to reject him. Okay. If you weren't aware, yes, the Bride of Frankenstein, the concept of the Bride of Frankenstein, though she's not explicitly referred to as a bride or a wife in this original text, but that is canon, the idea that Frankenstein demands a female mate to be created for him. The creature's story in 1818 and 1831, like this whole section, the predominant section of Volume 2, which is the creature telling his story of the past couple of years, it changes very little from 1818 to 1831. Some of Victor's part of Volume 2 changes, like when he goes on this walk originally that leads him to running into the creature, the first part of the walk is with his father and living brother, and maybe with Elizabeth too. But I found most of that to be kind of negligible, just like logistical differences. He does generally mention God as the creator more in 1831 when he's out appreciating nature and finding calm and peace in nature. And that kind of goes along with other changes where it feels like it has become a bit more Christian, a bit more like mainstream God oriented for the era. And I don't know how much of that is Mary Shelley's personal belief possibly becoming becoming stronger over time, her faith growing stronger over time, or if it made more sense for Victor as a character, if it just made more sense thematically to draw these parallels between creator and created. I tend to lean towards that. I think it has more to do with the fact that narratively, there's just so many beautiful parallels between the creation story in the Bible and the creation story of Frankenstein's monster. I think it's a refinement of the symbolism and the narrative. But I have no literature degree. I don't think I even took a literature class in college. So everything I say is just vibes. I'm just a random bitch with a podcast mic. You don't have to listen to me. And if you're a literature professor or something, you can comment your thoughts down below. All right, chapter 9 of volume 2, last chapter of volume 2 is we're back to Victor's POV and Victor's kind of raw reaction to this demand being laid at his feet. Victor's first instinct is to refuse. He never wants to do what he did again. But the creature pushes back, and he is very eloquent and convincing. And he sort of oscillates in this really terrifying way between being super calm and rational and I'm not going to force you, let's just have a rational conversation about this, to okay, but if you don't do it, I am going to kill everyone you love and then some and go on a rampage and torment all of humanity for all of time, or you can just create a mate for me and then I won't do that. So it's this like kind of it's almost like an emotionally abusive, very manipulative, very scary, like I'm being logical, I'm being rational, it's up to you to make a decision, but really there's a very violent ultimatum belying that. But aside from being threatened and being scared, Victor is also quite actually moved by the creature's story. He does agree that he, as the creator, has a responsibility to this creature. He does feel a sense of duty and responsibility and some shame for his neglect. And the creature is like sweetening the deal, saying like, look, if you do this for me, I swear to God, we'll disappear. We'll go to South America, to the remote forest lands where no humans live, and I will survive on nuts and berries. I won't even kill an animal to eat. I will be so benevolent. I'll do no harm. Just give me this one thing and nobody gets hurt. And Victor doubts that, but ultimately he feels he has no choice but to comply for the sake of humanity so that the creature doesn't go on a rampage and mass murder humans, and also for the sake of the creature, who he is in fact responsible for. After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that the justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded of me that I should comply with his request. And the creature is like, yay, awesome. I swear to God, if you do this for me, you'll never see me again. I'm going to go. I'll be watching you. I'll be watching your progress. Good luck. Have fun. Make me a mate. Goodbye. He like literally runs down the mountain with super speed and disappears out into the sea and the ice, leaving Victor with the reality as it settles in of what he has agreed to do. Victor takes his long journey home. He walks back into his family house after having spent the night walking through the bitter cold with no sleep. He looks haggard and wild and haunted, and once again, he doesn't answer anybody's questions about anything. He does not explain where he's been or what he's done because he can't explain. And as much as they are worried about him and doting on him, his father and Elizabeth and his brother Ernest, he hates himself, he's disgusted with himself, and he feels completely unworthy of their love and their affection and comfort. But at the same time, because he loves them so much, because he adores them, he has resigned himself to this terrible task he has to create a female monster to protect them from the rage of the creature. And so he sets his mind to it, and he knows that he has no choice but to do it. And thus, with dread and burden, we end volume 2 and move on to the final volume of the book, volume 3. Don't forget to leave me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave me a review, like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. You can go to my website, moviesforbreakfast.com. You can find all my links to everything there, and I have a really pretty library of episodes that you can explore there as well. Okay, moving on to volume 3, we open with Victor faced with this monumental task ahead of him. Not only is he repulsed morally and ethically by the idea of this task, he's also just like straight up procrastinating because he knows, even though he's done it before, it's still going to be months of hard work, really intricate work. And this time he's not going to be sustained by the kind of feverish impulse to innovate that he felt the first time. He was in this like massive, manic, hyper-focused state when he made the creature. And now he feels this immense dread and revulsion for the same huge undertaking. And he's just dreading having to push through that to actually get it done. Okay, so he's kind of just putting it off. And the more that he feels distant from that agreement with the creature, the more his health improves, his spirits improve, and he can almost like put it on the back burner and pretend like it's not happening. Victor's dad can still sense that something is off with him, and he pulls Victor aside and he's like, listen, son, I feel like you're not being honest about something, and I just want you to know that if you met another girl, you know, you've been gone for like 4 years in Germany, if you met someone who you want to marry and it's not Elizabeth, as your mother and I always thought you would marry Elizabeth, if you're in love with someone else or if you don't feel like you should marry her, it's okay. That's fine. No one is going to be like upset with you. Just be honest about it. And Victor's like, no, I do love her. There is no one I'm interested in other than Elizabeth. I adore her. I totally want to marry her. And his dad's like, great. Well, let's get the wedding going then. Let's arrange the wedding. Why put it off? I think we could all use something positive. We could use a celebration of love. You're grown up now. You've always known you were going to marry each other. Why not do it now? And Victor so badly wants to give in and to get to experience this like beautiful thing he always dreamed of with his family, but he knows deep down there's no way he's going to be able to actually live in the moment or enjoy an engagement and a wedding until he finishes his business with the creature. So he makes an excuse to explain to his dad why he needs to go travel to England for work for a little before they do the wedding. He needs to go to England because there are like some scientists who have been publishing research or whatever that could really help him get this second creature created, and he wants to work with them. It'll just be easier to work with them in person than exchanging like a lengthy communication via the post. He also just doesn't want to do this evil, hated task at home around his family. He wants to compartmentalize again and be able to close off the world of his like evil laboratory and these things that he has nightmares about. And then the like fake, happy, perfect world with his family where he pretends like none of the dark stuff is happening. So he just wants to go very far away, get it done, and then he can come home. Marrying Elizabeth will be like his reward for finishing with this ugly business, and then everything will be fine. Elizabeth hated the idea of Victor leaving, mostly for his own sake. She's worried about him and worried about him like retreating into his sort of mysterious mental darkness again. So Elizabeth makes sure that Henry is going to go with Victor. And Victor, deep down, is relieved. He's happy to have his friend with him, even if he doesn't want to get Henry wrapped up in any of his crap and he feels bad and like unworthy. He's also just like terribly lonely and scared, and having his best friend with him makes it a little bit less horrifying. And in 1831, the way that Elizabeth deals with Victor leaving, Victor says, "She longed to bid me hasten my return. 1,000 conflicting emotions rendered her mute as she bade me a tearful, silent farewell." So again, she's always this kind of like long-suffering, angelic, good, obedient, quiet woman in 1831. In 1818, Elizabeth's reaction is quite different. Elizabeth approved of the reasons of my departure and only regretted that she had not the same opportunities of enlarging her experience and cultivating her understanding. She wept, however, as she bade me farewell and entreated me to return happy and tranquil. "We all," said she, "depend on you, and if you are miserable, what must be our feelings?" Quite different. Not only is she not in anguish that Victor is leaving. She completely understands why he wants to go, and in fact wishes that she herself had the same opportunity to travel for education, for research, for whatever independent pursuits might interest her. But because she's a woman, she doesn't have the same opportunities. And it's interesting, I feel, to cut that out and change that, and also to change her from weeping to tearfully silent, and to change her from telling him, come back happy and healthy, we need you, if you're miserable, imagine how we feel. None of that. She doesn't say any of that in 1831. She disagrees with him leaving, but she silently falls in line. I can't help but see a teenage girl behind 1818. I see a young Mary Shelley, maybe feistier, more constantly aware of or contemplating the limitations of being a woman in society, whereas maybe in 1831, that was a less front of mind issue for a grown woman. I don't know. It just feels very teenage to be like, ugh, I wish I could go to England on this trip and just talk to professors and study and learn, but you better come back, okay? We don't like when you're gone. Elizabeth is feistier in 1818. In 1831, she's so subdued and so obedient and quiet and submissive in a way that I can't help finding less interesting, and I can't help feeling more distant from Elizabeth as a result of that. And I also feel like Elizabeth is a teenager. Elizabeth is more likely to have that impulse to speak her mind or think about how life is not fair, how the world is not fair. Teenagers think about that. Teenagers think about how unfair things are because they feel it. They feel that they're treated unfairly acutely, and often for the first time in their lives. So I liked that about Elizabeth in the 1818 version, and I kind of dislike this more subdued Elizabeth in 1831. Again, I don't know what was going through Mary Shelley's head. I don't know why Mary Shelley changed her. It could, again, be a matter of Victor's perspective. Maybe Victor is imagining Elizabeth to be more of this subdued, submissive woman who he dreams of. We don't know. Anyway, so off go Henry and Victor on their long journey across Europe together, and they're having a great time. Or at least Henry's having a great time. Henry is so full of lust for life and curiosity, and he's just having the vacation of a lifetime while Victor is stewing in his own psychological torment and horror. 1831 also weirdly adds a bit about Henry being really excited about colonizing India. In Britain only could he further the execution of his plan. That's just not in 1818. And this is in line with some of the earlier changes to Henry's character, where he's very early on interested in kind of like conquest and capitalist colonization. This is just weird to me. I don't know. Henry is supposed to be a very likable, lovable character. He's Victor's best friend. He's a great friend and a great person to everyone he loves. So why he's really overzealous about colonizing India with the British, I don't know. It feels a little bit contradictory to some of the values in other parts of the book, like where Safie and the creature are learning about the colonization of the Americas, and they're both really sad at the stories of the devastation that it caused. So it's just a bit jarring to me how Mary Shelley has, on the one hand, injected that as a vicarious value of some of the characters who are at that point in the story beloved, and then simultaneously injected totally opposite values, recolonization, in another supposedly beloved character. Maybe I'm oversimplifying that. I just remember kind of raising my eyebrow, why is Henry passionate about colonizing India now? Why did we insert that into the narrative? It's weird, Mary Shelley. Finally, Victor remembers the urgency of his task, and he's worried that the creature maybe stayed in Switzerland and could harm Victor's family. He has assumed that the creatures followed him to England because it had promised that it would follow him wherever he went to work. But he's like, I better get to work before he starts taking it out on my family how long I've been procrastinating. So Victor goes to this really remote island in Scotland and rents this extremely ramshackle little cabin and starts working on creating the bride. She's never referred to as the bride, once again. The female creature. By the way, should I talk about Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride? starring Jessie Buckley. I saw it and I have thoughts. I don't know. Are we interested in a full video? I'll talk about it regardless in my March wrap up, but like, let me know if you're interested in a full video on that in addition to a full video on Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein. Y'all let me know what you're interested in, okay? Victor is able to push himself to make progress on the task, even though he's disgusted by it. He says, "Sometimes I could not prevail on myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and at other times I toiled day and night in order to complete my work." After some time, as Victor is approaching the finalization of this second creation, it's now been about 3 years since he created the first monster, and he's reflecting on it and starting to second guess his decision to agree to the creature's demands now that it's actually right in front of his face and he can see physically and tangibly what he's about to do again. He's realizing that while the creature made all these promises to him, the second creature, the female, who he has yet to animate with life, has not agreed to anything, and he has no idea what she'll be like. He had no idea what the first one would be like. He doesn't know if she's going to be murderous and full of rage. She didn't promise that she would disappear and leave men alone. Only this creature promised that. What if the female creature doesn't like the creature? What if he doesn't like her? What if they hate each other? And if she rejects him, imagine what he'll do then. If she rejects him and she goes and finds company amongst humans, he would be so enraged, there's no telling what he would do. He's extremely sensitive to any kind of rejection, and he has assumed that this second creature would have to be with him because no humans would accept her. But what if it's different for her? What if she finds a way too? All of these thoughts are racing through his head, and honestly, they are valid concerns and things that he might have thought of the first time around if he weren't face to face with the creature on the top of a mountain, full of emotion and really moved by the creature's story. Now that it all feels much more real, now that it's all in front of him and he feels the burden of responsibility, he is just tormented and not sure what the right thing is to do. Ultimately, as he's gazing upon the hideous second creature, the body that he has constructed that is yet to be brought to life, he feels in his gut that this is wrong. He feels he made the wrong choice. It would actually be so selfish of him to bring this creature to life just to promise his own family and himself a life of peace, not knowing what could happen to other humans, to the rest of humanity doing this deed. What if, worst case scenario, the two creatures procreate? I found that a little bit silly because I'm like, just make them incapable of procreation. Don't give her a uterus. But I guess that's the fiction and the science fiction. Sometimes you have to suspend your disbelief. And anyway, Victor is like feverish and exhausted and emaciated from working, so he's not thinking super clearly. And then he looks up out the window and he sees his first demon watching. As I looked on him, his countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. It's always about the physical appearance. It's always about what Victor sees in the creature's face, the expressions that he sees or imagines that he sees in the creature's features. No rhyme intended. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another like to him, and trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge, withdrew. The creature sees and is devastated, and after a few minutes, he creeps into the cabin, and Victor is just rooted to the spot, terrified, quaking in his boots, as the creature walks inside and comes to confront Victor in his makeshift laboratory. And if you thought they were beefing before, it gets spicy now. The creature says to Victor, "Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey." Damn girl, she's really mad. But like, you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, the girls are fighting. Do you know what I mean? Like, guys, don't tell anyone, but I took a gummy like 35 minutes ago. So anything I say from here on out, I will not be beholden to. Thank you. Just kidding. Anyway, Victor holds his ground. He says, "No, I don't care. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Yeah, I break my promise. Okay. Creature says, "Okay, fine. That's how it's going to be? Fine. I go. But remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. Bam, bam, bam. So Victor immediately assumes that means that the creature will murder him on his wedding night. Is that what it sounds like to you? I don't know. It's not really what I assumed that meant when I read this, even the first time, even though I know now I've read it like 3 times. But even the first time I remember being like, Victor, are we prematurely jumping to conclusions? Are we not thinking about what has happened in the past regarding revenge? I don't know why you're so sure that you're going to get killed on your wedding night, but okay. Victor throws the remains of the second creature in the sea, sinks them, drowns them in the sea, and sails away to go meet Henry in Perth. He kind of gets off track. It's a stormy, windy night. He's in this little sailboat, and the wind eventually takes him to land that he wasn't initially aiming towards. The people are really weirdly cold and suspicious to him, like immediately, and he's just confused. He doesn't know why. And remember, he is Swiss, okay, by birth. This is maybe his first time ever in England and Scotland. And so he lands on this island and he hears the people speaking English and he says, "Why do you answer me so roughly? Surely it is not the custom of Englishmen to receive strangers so inhospitably." "I do not know," said the man, "what the custom of the English may be. It is the custom of the Irish to hate villains." I'm sorry for that Irish accent. Wait, let me do it one time American in case I just can't bear to keep that in. Oof. Oof. You land on an island, people are acting weird to you, and you accidentally call the Irish people there English, you're fucked. Well, it turns out the reason why they're all being so weird to him, they're taking him to the authorities to give his account of the murder that took place last night. Volume 3, Chapter 4, they take Victor to see the magistrate, who is a very nice, fair old man. It turns out that the previous night, the locals found the dead body of a very handsome, about 25-year-old man who appears to have been strangled to death with a hand mark left around his neck. Sound familiar? Victor freaks out when he hears that, which looks suspicious as hell. Apparently, they saw a man in a boat nearby shore around the same time as when they discovered the body. And that looked just like Victor did when he landed on shore. They decide to take Victor to see the body and gauge his reaction to seeing the body to try to tell if he's innocent or not. I have to say, if anything, this book is a condemnation of every justice system in England because they are all whack. And of course, once Victor is able to examine the body, he sees that tragically, that is his friend, the handsome Henry Clerval, who has been strangled to death. Goodbye, sweet prince. In a typical Victor drama queen moment, he basically falls into a 2-month-long fever and is ranting half coherently about how he killed William, he killed Justine, and now he killed Henry. He is the murderer, etc., etc. They keep him in a jail cell, which the magistrate, who's like a very nice guy, tells him is like the nicest jail cell they have. And they have a nurse watching him and taking care of him. Even though it is basically a garbage dungeon, they are doing the best they can for Victor, to be fair. And the magistrate, Mr. Kerwin, was also able to find like letters or something on Victor's person. And so he wrote to Victor's family to let them know what the situation was. So his father has come all the way from Switzerland to check on Victor, who is in jail for Henry's murder. Okay. And everyone is fine. Everyone is safe at home. Nothing has happened back home. So at least that is a relief to Victor while he's in prison. After a few months, they go to court and the charges are dropped. There's proof that Victor had still been on the other islands where he had been working on the second creature at the time when the Irish villagers found Henry's body. So he is released. He's not found guilty. He just spent a few months in jail sick and his dad had to go scoop him. At this point, Victor is deteriorating further, not recovering. He's taking laudanum to sleep every night because he's so haunted by his own conscience. Chapter 5, Victor gets a letter from Elizabeth while he and his father are on their way back to Switzerland. And Elizabeth expresses the same doubts that his father had expressed regarding Victor's desire to, I don't know why I'm talking like that. Elizabeth expresses, similar to Victor's father, that she's worried Victor has fallen in love with another girl or for whatever reason, like doesn't want to marry Elizabeth. She's like, I don't know, maybe you see me as a sister. Maybe you don't want to get married to me. And we both have felt this pressure since we were so young. I just want you to know it is my worst nightmare for you to marry me if you don't actually really, really want to. I just want you to be happy. And if that's not with me, that's fine. But you know how I feel about you. You know I love you. Let me know. Okay? Thanks. Everyone in the Frankenstein family and Henry is extremely caring and thoughtful and considerate and kind. And it just makes Victor even more of a tragic figure, in my opinion, because it shows that even with all this love and goodness and support and every advantage in the world that he ever could have asked for, he still created a tragedy out of his life all by his own doing. And it all came down to his pride and his ego and a kind of Greek tragic brand of hubris. He just did a bad thing. He just did something wrong that did not need to happen. And meanwhile, in his whole narrative, it was inevitable. It was fate. It was destiny. That friction is very interesting to me. Anyway, Victor reassures Elizabeth that he absolutely does want to marry her. And in his head, he's thinking, let's just get this over with. I can't delay my wedding just to avoid the creature. He might just come for me anyway. Might as well do it and know he's coming and be prepared to face him and fight to the death on my wedding night. And he promises to Elizabeth, who is no fool. Elizabeth knows that there's still something that he's hiding from her and from his father. He says, I will tell you everything the day after our wedding. I don't want to burden you with this until we're married. You would think he were a mob boss and he wanted them to be married so she wouldn't have to testify against him in court. Like, his logic isn't totally sound there, but Elizabeth is just like, okay. Victor and his father get back to Geneva, start preparing quickly for the wedding. Victor is totally paranoid. He is armed. He is armed and paranoid all the time. But they do have a beautiful wedding ceremony, and they're going to go off and have their honeymoon at this like lake house. And so the night of their wedding, they depart Geneva and they start on their journey to their honeymoon destination. I think it's on Lake Como. Mary Shelley also loves a European vacation lake. They are both trying to live in the moment and enjoy this special day that they've been looking forward to all their lives, but they can both feel the tension in the air. Chapter 6, they arrive at an inn for the night, the first night of their honeymoon journey. Victor is pacing with the pistol, waiting for the creature. He's like doing a perimeter of the inn that they're staying at, and he tells Elizabeth to go to bed so that she can get some rest and so that she won't have to witness anything horrific when the creature arrives to fight him. He is not seeing any sign of the creature. He keeps pacing and patrolling and looking out into the forest, and he just doesn't see anything. And then finally, he hears something, a horrifying, blood-curdling scream from their room inside the inn. Did you call that? Did you see that coming? I feel like I saw that coming. What do you mean you're going to leave Elizabeth alone on your wedding night when the creature said he'd be with you on your wedding night, when he has a history of killing your loved ones and not killing you? Fucking idiot. Of course, when he goes back to the room, he finds Elizabeth dead on their wedding night shared bed, still in her wedding gown, with the mark of the creature's hands on her neck. He strangled her to death the same way that he killed Henry and the same way that he killed William, and Victor is just broken. Goodbye to our beautiful Elizabeth. And then there were 3 humans in the family left, 1 creature and 1 Captain Walton to tell us the story. Actually, I'm checking now and I don't think it ever says that she was still in her wedding gown, but I very much pictured her that way when I read it. It doesn't say that she's not in her wedding gown. She was there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down and her pale and distorted features half covered by her hair. Everywhere I turn, I see the same figure, her bloodless arms and relaxed form flung by the murderer on its bridal bier. Could I behold this and live? It's pretty heartbreaking. Worst of all, while Victor is standing there over his wife's dead body, he looks up out the window and guess who's there? With a sensation of horror not to be described, I saw at the open window a figure the most hideous and abhorred. A grin was on the face of the monster. He seemed to jeer, as with his fiendish finger he pointed towards the corpse of my wife. Victor rushes to the window and fires his pistol at the creature, but the creature gets away, jumps into the lake, and is gone. Victor now, once again, has to run back to Geneva to try to protect his father and his remaining brother, Ernest, from the same fate at the hands of the creature. Victor's father is so devastated by the news of Elizabeth's murder that he essentially dies of a broken heart a few days after Victor returns to Geneva. He is just completely heartbroken and devastated to lose this girl who was like a daughter to him, and also now his daughter-in-law, the wife to his beloved eldest son. It's just too much for him, and Victor's father, Alphonse Frankenstein, also dies. Victor tries to seek revenge with the help of the police. So he goes to the magistrate, and as he's telling his story, he can tell the guy is kind of like half believing him, half skeptical, teetering on the edge, because on the one hand, what the hell are you talking about? You created an 8-foot tall monster and brought him to life, and now he's killing everyone you love. But on the other hand, you do have a good bit of evidence in support of that theory. So he's like on the edge, but finally Victor kind of just goes too far, and he can tell that he loses the guy. He decides that Victor's just crazy and he feels bad for him and he's not going to help. He tells Victor, look, anyway, even if all of this is true, it sounds like this thing is invincible and impossible to fight and beat. So we're not going to spend department resources and taxpayer dollars on hunting down your Bigfoot. Makes sense. At the end of this chapter, he realizes and decides that he's going to have to seek revenge on the creature all on his own. Which brings us to chapter 7 of volume 3. Guys, this is the final chapter in the book. It's a long chapter, but let's wrap everything up in a bow and then we can move on to closing thoughts. A lot of what's left is almost self-explanatory at this point, given the gaps between what Victor has told us so far and the beginning of Captain Walton's letters. So we're kind of just going to connect the dots between those two, okay? Victor resolves to leave Geneva forever and never come back. He has a very dramatic declaration of his resolution to get revenge on the creature. By the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, by the deep and eternal grief that I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and the spirits that preside over thee, to pursue the demon who caused this misery until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. For this purpose I will preserve my life. Let the cursed and hellish monster drink deep of agony. Let him feel the despair that now torments me. So, for the third time in this book, after he calls out into the night, calls out into nature with one of these dramatic declarations, the fiend responds by appearing in the distance. So he says all this out into the night, and in return, he hears the echo of a loud, fiendish laugh from the creature somewhere in the distance listening. It's now full-on horror, full-on spooky story stuff. The creature taunts Victor and whispers that he's happy that at least Victor has decided to live, because now he can torment him even more. So the creature basically starts this game of catch me if you can with Victor, and he hauls Victor along all north through Russia. It's a miserable, horrible, cold journey, and the creature just keeps going further and further north because the cold doesn't bother him as much as it bothers Victor. So he's just doing everything he can to give Victor hell, and if that includes luring him deep into the icy tundra of the north, then that's what he'll do. The creature will even leave taunting notes in the snow or like carved into things for Victor to catch up to. Really diabolical game playing. He'll sometimes hunt for Victor and leave Victor game because he's trying to help Victor stay alive long enough to continue being tortured, basically. At some point, they reach the sea and the creature keeps going on the open ice on a sled carried by dogs. So Victor has no choice but to do the same. He buys a sled and some dogs and pursues the creature even over the ice. Eventually, he loses track of the creature when the ice starts breaking up, and that's when he caught up with Captain Walton's ship, and that's when they found him floating on this piece of ice in the ocean on the brink of death. Then the narrative turns back to the present, and Victor having this dialogue with Captain Walton. And in Victor's kind of brink of death rambling, he is imploring the captain to kill the creature if Victor dies before he can do it himself. And he's saying, like, I know it's not fair to put that on you, and I shouldn't put that on you, but I wish you would kill the creature if you saw him. Even after all of this story, Captain Walton still deeply admires Victor and sees him as almost godlike. The same way the creature saw the villagers as almost godlike and admired them so much. Victor kind of confesses and admits that he knows he flew too close to the sun, basically, and he knows he went too far and that all of this really is his fault. Like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I am chained in an eternal hell. From my infancy, I was imbued with high hopes and a lofty ambition, but how I am sunk. And Captain Walton is like, no, come on, man, you rule. He writes to his sister, must I then lose this admirable being? I have longed for a friend. I have sought one who would sympathize with and love me. Behold, on these desert seas I have found such a one, but I fear I have gained him only to know his value and lose him. So Captain Walton is basically trying to talk Victor into having a will to live and to go on, and is saying, like, we can still help you recover. You don't have to die searching for this creature. But Victor is like, thank you, but I would like to die. It's over. I have nothing left to live for. A slight but noticeable difference between 1818 and 1831 comes in the form of Captain Walton reflecting on the state of his ship. So in 1818, he's a little bit more ambivalent about what will happen with the venture and writing to his sister. And he says, like, we might make it, we might not, basically. But in 1831, he's more self-aware about his role in the danger that everyone's lives are in. He says, yet it is terrible to reflect that the lives of all these men are endangered through me. If we are lost, my mad schemes are the cause. Not only is he worried morally, but he's also worried that the men might stage a mutiny because they're all convinced that he's going to keep pushing them north and north no matter how many of them get sick or die. Luckily, instead of a mutiny, probably because he has been such a generally respectful and good captain, a group of sailors come to talk to him. They implore Walton to make promises to the crew that if they ever get out of the ice that the ship is stuck in, he'll turn around and go home and not put more people at risk. Victor overhears this and essentially tells them to man up and have courage for their noble journey. Hello, Victor, were you not just spilling your whole guts to this captain to try to get him not to make the same mistakes as you? And now people are coming to him saying, hey, you're making this mistake where your ambition is blinding you to the value of a human life and to all of your moral and ethical obligations. And Victor's going, shut up, you guys. If Captain Walton wants to go north, you'll go north with him. Don't be a baby. Walton is like, okay, listen, can you guys just think about it, reflect on what my friend Victor has told you, and if in a few days you come back to me and you say you're not going to go north, then I will respect that decision. I'm not forcing anyone to do this incredibly dangerous mission if they don't want to. But think about it. Maybe you do want to. I mean, he's really not bad, but in my opinion, of course, the ethical thing would be to turn around no matter what they said, but it's not bad. It's not bad. Okay, at least he's saying he's not gonna pressure or bully or force anyone to do it and that they have a right to say no. A few days later, the ice does break up and they do decide to turn back the way they came. Victor, on his for real final deathbed this time, he concludes that he thinks he made the right decision not to create a second creature. He doesn't regret it. He thinks that ultimately that was the right decision. I think it's interesting to get a verdict out of Victor on that. What do you think? What do you think about it? I honestly think it was a really good conflict because I was conflicted with the character and I was going back and forth. And when the creature said things like, it's not fair for me to be alone forever, everyone has the chance to have some kind of companionship except for me, I found myself being like, yeah, you're right. And when Victor's like, I don't know, I think I just have to do this because I made him, he's my problem, and he deserves happiness. And also, I owe the people I love peace of mind that this thing I created will go away. I'm like, yeah. But then when Victor goes, wait, but she didn't promise me anything. What if she doesn't want to be with the monster who nobody wants to be with? I'm like, wait, also, yeah. It's a genuine dilemma. It's a genuine conflict. And it's something I feel like you could dig into and debate from so many different angles. So I think that's one of the more interesting parts of the story. And it makes sense that adaptations have blossomed out of that storyline. He also, again, asks Walton to kill the creature if he can after Victor dies. He urges Walton away from the dangers of ambition. Again, so self-contradictory with what he had said to the sailors about manning up and going north. But on some level, he has learned that lesson. After expressing all of his dying thoughts and hopes to his new best friend, Captain Walton, Victor finally dies. Goodbye, Victor Frankenstein, commonly known as Dr. Frankenstein. Never got a doctorate degree. Unclear if he ever graduated with that bachelor's degree. But to be fair to him, he was a scientific genius. So, Dr. Schmachter. Walton, writing to his sister immediately after Victor's death, is saying just how devastated he is. He can't express his sorrow over losing his friend, Victor, who he did really love and admire and care for after getting to know him. And as he's writing his letter to his sister, in the letter he's like, hold on, I think I just heard something. I gotta go check on that. I'll be back 1 second. He writes that into the letter. And then the next paragraph of text is like, holy shit, Margaret, you are not going to believe what I just saw. Captain Walton walked back into the quarters where Victor had literally just closed his eyes and died to see the creature in his quarters standing over Victor's body. And he describes him exactly as Victor had described him in the whole narrative. He was gigantic and deformed with long black hair covering his face. He's so consumed with his passion over Victor that he continues ranting kind of to Victor's corpse. And on the one hand, he's saying that now his mission is complete, his crimes are consummated, his work is done. But in the same breath, he's also saying, how am I also now begging for your forgiveness, Frankenstein? Oh, Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovedst. And even though one of Victor's dying wishes was for Captain Walton to kill the creature if he ever saw him, Walton finds himself feeling some curiosity and some compassion at this outpouring of emotion. And the creature goes on rambling, talking about how he regrets it and feeling bad. And finally, Walton's able to speak up and basically says, too little too late. You feel bad now. Well, Victor's dead, so it's kind of too late to feel bad. Then we get this really long confession from the creature. For the first time, the creature is talking to a human other than Victor, who knows who he is prepared to cope with his hideousness and look away from it, and knows his story. I mean, I don't know if he knows that Walton knows everything, but clearly, Walton's not running away screaming or trying to kill him. And that's kind of the first time he's had any reaction like this from a human, other than the blind old man DeLacy before his family came back. So he starts talking and he doesn't stop talking, and he gives his side of some of the events that Victor had narrated. He says that in murdering Clerval and murdering Elizabeth, he was miserable. He hated himself for it. He felt so guilty. He did not enjoy it. And he reproaches Frankenstein. He says, you think Frankenstein was sad? You think he felt bad? Imagine how I felt having to kill those people. I felt terrible. And again, it's this uncanny parallel to Victor himself talking about his guilt over the creature. He's saying, Elizabeth and Justine are sad because Justine's going to die. Yeah, well, at least they can sleep at night. I'm sad because I did this horrible thing I feel guilty about. And the creature is kind of the exact same way, saying how guilty and horrible he felt about committing these murders and how it was worse than Victor ever might have felt on the other end of it. Apple, tree. They both have a real tendency to engage in really indulgent self-pity over and above empathy for anybody else. After the murder of Clerval, I returned to Switzerland heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself. Talking about killing Elizabeth, he says, I knew that I was preparing for myself a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master of an impulse, which I detested yet could not disobey. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like our friend Victor talking about being a slave to his horrible fate and destiny and not being able to stray away from what the angel of death had planned for him? Walton, for all of his love and adoration of Victor, sees right through the hypocritical bullshit of the creature. And he says, "You throw a torch into a pile of buildings, and when they are consumed, you sit among the ruins and lament the fall." Hypocritical fiend. And much like his creator compared himself to a fallen angel, the creature says of himself, the fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Finally, after some more ranting and raving that feels very earned by the end of the book and is quite enjoyable, I thought, to read, very dramatic. Finally, the creature declares his intention to end his life now. Now that Victor and everyone Victor loves are dead, for some reason, everybody forgets about poor middle child Ernest. Ernest Frankenstein does not die that we know of. He survives this whole ordeal, and if you think about it, there's something exquisitely horrifying about that, rather than all of them having been killed. He's the middle brother after his younger brother, his adoptive sister, his older brother's best friend, both of his parents, his adoptive kind of cousin. After all of those people die, Victor's like, I have nothing left to live for. Everyone I love is dead. Bye-bye. And you gotta wonder from Ernest's point of view, like, what? So now I have to live in the aftermath of all of this alone. Yeah, just a quiet kind of part of the tragedy at the end. But the creature, too, declares his intention to end his life. He's consumed with self-loathing, he has no hope left, and he has no revenge left to seek. He says, "He is dead who called me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun or stars or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light, feeling, and sense will pass away, and in this condition must I find my happiness. I shall die, and what I now feel be no longer felt. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames." Part of that, some of those quotes from the creature's final declaration read very much like Mitski to me. I steal a few breaths from the world for a minute and then I'll be nothing forever. And all of my memories and all of the things I've seen will be gone with my eyes, with my body, with me. Beautiful, heartbreaking writing, both Mitski and Mary Shelley. And after this final farewell, the creature jumps out the window of the captain's cabin onto the nearest piece of ice, and he was soon gone and lost to the darkness in the distance. And so Captain Walton did not fulfill his promise to Frankenstein that he would kill the creature, but I think he believes that the creature is telling the truth, that he is going to go end his own life. That concludes Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Congratulations. We made it through. I'm going to be so real with you. I tried my best to prepare more for this video than I did for Wuthering Heights. So, I mean, I don't know if you've been able to see in my book this whole time, like, I have annotated so thoroughly. I wrote up little chapter summaries and I limited myself to the space of a big Post-it so that I wouldn't overdo it. And I really tried to pace and time it out so I wouldn't get lost in the sauce and then rush towards the end. And that's why I filmed this in so many different pieces, because I just never wanted to like give up and rush to the end. But I still managed to record 5.5 hours of raw content. That's not including an extra 45 minutes that were out of focus that I completely redid. So I'm just kind of mentally fried. So I don't even know what's left to say. I feel like I really gave you my thoughts along the way. Let me know what you think. If you've read Frankenstein, maybe you read it a long time ago in high school and this was a refresher course. Did anything stand out to you this time that you don't remember from your reading of the book? Please let me know in the comments. I feel like I learned so much from people in my Wuthering Heights comments. So chime in if this is a book you love. As always, like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Seriously, rate me 5 stars and leave me a review. Seriously, do it. Do it. It means so much. I guess to wrap up the discussion that I started earlier about changing my posting schedule to be bi-weekly rather than weekly. Yeah, there's just a lot going on. First of all, I'm not making like any kind of serious money on this yet. So this is not a full-time endeavor. And I have tried really hard to commit myself to it full-time while unemployed. But it turns out it's still not the same as being a full-time endeavor because I'm spending a lot of time on the job hunt, applications, interviews, blah, blah, blah. So that kind of took precedence this month in a big way, especially because with the war going on, it's harder for me to perform emotionally and give a performance in a video or a podcast episode, be funny, be entertaining. It's harder for me to do that when I'm mentally preoccupied with war and with Lebanon than to do my day job kind of work, which is a good distraction, honestly. And it's just harder to compartmentalize this kind of work than to do data science. I'm preoccupied, my heart and my mind is elsewhere, and I just don't want to put out bad vibes, depressing content. That's not my goal. That's not my brand. And it just wasn't, the chemistry wasn't there. My chemistry with myself and my camera and my microphone wasn't there. I feel like I've done better in this video. I've been able to get out of my head and get in the zone and hopefully deliver the same kind of like positive distraction that other people enjoy as escapism. But sometimes it's hard to create the escapism when I can't even feel it. I mean, I've even had a hard time watching movies. I oscillate when I'm like down about the world. Sometimes the cure for that is art and movies and books and museums. And sometimes the cure for that is reality TV and sports. It kind of depends. Like for a while, I couldn't stand reality TV because I was like, I don't care about this. This doesn't matter. Look at the world. And then this month I was like, look at the world. I just had to turn off everything inside me. I can't watch a movie and cry. I just need to watch The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which by the way is also depressing. And I'm just a bleeding heart, I think, is the conclusion. I'm just sensitive. Frankly, I mark it as success that anyone even noticed I wasn't posting every week and that I got comments and messages asking about it. That means people care and are waiting, and I definitely don't want to let anyone down. But I haven't even had this for a year, this podcast. So I'm figuring it out. Anyway, I look forward to editing this behemoth I've created. I feel like Victor in the lab looking at the 5.5 hours of content I have to edit, but I'm excited. I think it'll be worth it. Let me know if it was worth it.